everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, 2022. This is the regular meeting of the City of Asbury Park Zoning Board of Adjustment. And presiding today is Mr. Dan Harris as chairman. Mr. Harris, would you please call us to order?
Okay, call to order. This meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the Coaster and the Asbury Park Press by publication of the annual meeting notice and posted on the municipal bulletin board and municipal website. All notices are on file with the board secretary. Official action may be taken on the following matters before the board. Fire exits are located on the east and west sides of the council chambers, as well as the back of the building. I will ask everyone with a cell phone or other devices to kindly silence your device for the duration of the meeting. This meeting is being recorded by APTV. In short order, turn off your cell phone. Okay, at this time though, before we get started, I would just like to take a short amount of time and offer a moment of silence for the people in Buffalo, the people in Orange County, California, and today the 14 children and one teacher in Texas who were killed. So if we can have a moment of silence, please, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. I will now take roll. Daniel Harris?
Here.
Brittany Drumwood?
Here.
Jill Potter is recused. Tim Slick?
Here.
Wendy Glassman is also recused. Bonnie Knopf?
Here.
John Scully is also recused. Russell Lewis is recused. And finally, Christopher Avalone is also recused. And joining us again today, thank you very much for being here, is Barbara Kazak. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. We are continuing the application for City by the Sea vet, Thomas J. Calabolota. I hope I got it right, sir. Thank you. 1411 Memorial Drive, Block 2303, Lot 6, in the R1 zone. I would now like the applicant's attorney, Mr. Kennedy, to please go ahead and begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the moment of silence. It was very, very nice touch and very respectful. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll recall this is a continuation of our hearing from last month. And Mr. Chairman, at the last hearing, there were a lot of questions and comments and concerns which were raised, and many of which, quite frankly, were very awesome and excellent questions, comments, and concerns. And we heard you, my client heard you, and the development team heard you, and we literally wrote down a list of all the questions and comments and concerns that were made or that were asked, and we attempted to address many of them. Plan revisions were made so as to address the overwhelming majority of those questions and comments and concerns. Based upon the last hearing and the review memos we received, there was a request for a sound or acoustical engineer to testify. My client, Dr. Tom, said that sounds like a fair request, and immediately, and in the context of this use variance application, he said, I want the board to be comfortable with what they're reviewing and hopefully approving. So we, Dr. Tom retained an acoustical engineer, and he will, once sworn, provide you with a lot of the fascinating and very interesting professional testimony relative to the impact, the noise impact associated with this proposal. And at the risk of giving a spoiler alert, the sound expert will testify as to why he believes that approval of this application will not have an adverse noise impact on the surrounding community. And that concept is important, and I think it was, under the circumstances, correct and appropriate to retain a sound expert so that all of you can hopefully, after you hear the information, can hopefully be as comfortable and as satisfied as our team is relative to the noise issue. And as will be explained, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen of the board, on the noise issue, on the noise concern level and the concern about possible issues, some of these plan revisions that will be talked about tonight, where some of the so-called noisier rooms have been relocated to the center of the building, which I think was discussed and even encouraged by some of the board members, or some questions were asked. There are extra interior walls being placed behind or in front of the windows so as to serve as a future barrier. There are enhanced windows, and there's a higher grade ceiling tile. And quite frankly, I did not have a lot of information about the degree of ceiling tile grades, but we will hear about that tonight and why that can help address a potential noise issue. And also, the doors have been enhanced so as to become double doors. And we think that we came in here last month with a great project, and we think that we're coming in here tonight with an even greater project, and we hope you will think that as well. So in short order, what I would like to do tonight with the chair's consent is I'm going to rebring my architect up to very briefly describe some of the, he testified at length last time, and he will just very briefly describe some of the architectural changes. And I would ask that we remember we have the noise expert next coming, so noise and questions can be addressed to the noise expert. And then we'll have our engineer, who was previously sworn, retestify and bring up those changes. And then we'll have our traffic engineer to talk about traffic and parking, and our planner. So, Mr. Chairman, if it's acceptable, I would like to recall Michael Testa, our architect.
You may. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Testa, you were sworn at the last meeting, but if you swear or affirm that the testimony you provide this evening will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And if you could just state your name and spell your last for the record, please?
Sure, my name is Michael Testa, T-E-S-T-A.
And while we're doing that, we might as well swear in our professionals as well.
You may.
Solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Testa, you heard my opening statement, so why don't you briefly talk about some of the architectural changes that we made and why, and address some of the questions that were raised at the last hearing.
The board provided some very insightful comments with respect to how the space was being utilized, with respect to noise from the outside and noise from the inside. The biggest concern the board had was in the back right corner. I have a board up here, which is what the board package has. I don't see anything up on the screen. But in your previous application, we had a play area, 2 playrooms in this area here, and we had a boarding area along the exterior wall here. The board's concern was that this play area, which was going to be most likely the noisiest space in the building, was adjacent to the residential properties at this edge of the building. So what the board's advice is we took those spaces out of here and we moved them essentially to the center of the building. You have the larger play area here and the smaller play area here, isolating itself from the perimeter of the building. All of the walls in these higher noise areas will be full height partitions that will go to the underside of the room, which will mitigate sound transference over the tops of ceilings and so forth. And the sound engineer will talk more about sound transmission through the walls. We've also, in the areas where we do have the boarding areas and the cattery, we are building partitions in front of the walls. So it's again another level of sound protection or sound transmission through the walls, both from outside in and inside out. The windows will remain, but they will be blacked out. So from the street, they will look like the lights are off inside the building, but we will still maintain the overall appearance of the building from the exterior. Another recommendation from our acoustical engineer was the ceiling tile, the suspended ceiling tile that was going to be used in these noisier spaces. So the ceiling tile have ratings, two different types of ratings for sound. One, more importantly, is a CAC rating, which Mr. Norm Doty will speak to. And what that is, it's anything 35 to 40 is a better rating. It'll be most sound absorption, and it'll kind of contain the release of sound. So we are going with a industry standard, which is a Armstrong ceiling. I have a cut sheet in here. It's called a Yuma white ceiling, which has a CAC rating of 35, which we meet that superior ceiling system. Even Armstrong rates it as a superior system. As far as sound, the rest of the spaces along the bottom, along 6th Avenue and along Memorial Drive, those windows are all public spaces. We didn't feel that the need to have additional glazing systems installed there, but we are, even though we're going to be blocking the walls in the perimeter area where the cattery is and the dog boarding area, we're also going to go with a greater sound resistant glass. It's going to be a 1-inch thick insulated glass that's laminated on one side. That's going to give us a greater sound rating than it would for a regular insulated glass panel. And Mr. Doty, our acoustical engineer, can speak a little bit more about that. Another comment was from Mr. Sullivan. At the front entrance here, we had built a platform because of the elevated interior floor slab. We had to have a ramp, a handicap accessible ramp, to get to our entrance area. Mr. Sullivan's initial comment was that he wanted to have the ramp shielded with a low wall. We took that one step further and we wrapped the entire platform with that wall. I guess after further analysis of that situation, Mr. Sullivan made a recommendation to basically pull back the wall on the ramp and extend the platform slightly over to give it a more symmetrical look at the front facade. So we took Mr. Sullivan's sketch that he provided in his review letter, and we incorporated that into our plan. So that wall will stop and appear consistent with Mr. Sullivan's recommendation. Another comment that the board had was with respect to the rooftop screen and what would the rooftop screen look like. We have an updated rendering that shows it's going to be the same color. Let me put this up here. If you like to label this as an exhibit, well, this is slightly different than the rendering the board has. This rendering here identifies.
You know what, excuse me, should we mark that?
I'm sorry, this will be exhibit A2.
I'm at A2, yes. And Michael, Testa, just identify what A2 is.
A2 is a two-dimensional color rendering of all four sides of the building.
Thank you.
And this is updated, this is the date on top.
There's no date.
Okay, so we'll just date it
Today.
today, 5/24/2022.
And Michael, just for the record, prepared by your office?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
The four elevations, the top elevation being the front facing Memorial, the right being 6th Ave, and the rear and left side facing both residential properties. What's important with these images, and I thought that needed to be here tonight, was one, the color representation of what Mr. Sullivan had requested, with the walls being stretched out, the stretch of the center line of the brick surfaces on either side of the entrance, and the ramp railing is going to be left exposed, as per Mr. Sullivan's sketch, would be shielded with some kind of greenery and more landscaping to enhance that. What we've also did was we lowered the sign above the entrance door to approximately 14 feet 3 inches to the bottom of the sign. We lowered it down 14 feet 6 inches, and there's a 3-foot sign, which is consistent with the last representation. It was just brought down closer to above the front door. Also, you can see the screening around the top. We put vertical lines in there, and we also colored it more consistent with the entire building. So the screening panels around the rooftop units will match the building. They'll be set in. One of our revised drawings is a revised roof plan that shows the location of all the rooftop units, how far they're in, and also gives you a dimension how far that screen is from the end. You can see here from the elevations it's set back at least 6 to 8 feet. That's the closest part. And it is at a height that's about 21 feet 7 inches above grade. So that height is important with respect to the comment the board had made about what do the adjacent neighbors see on the roof. Previously, the adjacent neighbors saw just a flat roof in great disrepair with rooftop units fully exposed on that roof. So with our 6-foot-high metal screen at a total height of 21 foot 7, we feel that the adjacent buildings would not be looking down on top of those units. On the corner of 6th Ave and Drury, you have a 2.5-story apartment building. That apartment building, the end of the building faces our property. That wall is fairly blank. There are small windows in the center, which have not been in there, but architecturally speaking, form following function, those small windows to me represent a stairwell at the center location, so there's no direct unit looking down. Between that building and our building is a two-story residential structure. Looking at that structure, the finished floor is about 4 feet above grade. Okay, then you have an 8-foot-high ceiling, an assumed 10-inch deep floor joist for the second floor, and then a 6'8" window, which is standard architectural treatment for any house built prior to probably the 90s, since we had the McMansions. So taking that into effect, that top of that window at 6'8" above the second floor is at 19'6" above grade. So that 19'6" is still below the 21'7" elevation to look down onto the roof. So it's really screening those rooftop units. The units to the left of the property, oh geez, I'm drawing a blank for the street, where the additional residential structures are, those structures appear to be even lower than the house directly to our right on 6th Avenue. Approximately 1 foot lower, which is going to bring that second floor window down even more. So I'm confident in the fact that the 6-foot-high screen, which is approximately 21 feet 7 inches above grade, will adequately screen that from both ground level pedestrians and then the residents adjacent to the property. That I feel pretty much, also along that, with that being said, going out to the site, the side of the building that's perpendicular to 6th Avenue has large growth trees that are in full bloom, shielding. It's not going to shield it during the winter, but it does enhance the privacy between the residential units in our building. And then same thing on the other side of the property with large old growth trees that are shielding a lot of the roof area as well. They're not on our property, or at least didn't appear to be on our property from an architectural review. I prepared also kind of images here of interior dog parks. I'd like to get to the board. Do you want to label that exhibit?
A3, Mr. Beekman?
Yes.
And just identify what A3 is?
A3 are 3 photographs of interior dog playrooms. I'm going to pass out to each one of the boards to show the commonplace of such a space. As we indicated before, this is predominant in city areas, more urban spaces where they don't have the luxury of outdoor space.
And just for the record, Mr. Testa, this is not our proposed.
No, these are just images of similar spaces, and you can see the activities with the animals in these spaces.
And I believe, Mr. Chairman, it was you who respectfully requested, hey, could I see an illustrated version of what an interior dog room looks like? So that's the...
That's just for the public, if anybody wants to.
So what these images show, they show confined indoor spaces with devices inside the room that allows the animals to run freely. Obviously, it looks like an indoor-outdoor carpet or some type of turf grass that they use in these facilities. We probably do a little more research to find the exact material. The ones that I've worked on before have been VCT tile, but this is, again, another aspect that possibly some sound reduction using this material versus a VCT floor, vinyl floor. But as you can see, there's small spaces. It's just enough to allow the animals to roam freely, and they've been pretty successful. If you go on Google, which I did to obtain these images, there's hundreds of images of similar facilities.
Mr. Oh, sorry.
No, but I think that concludes.
Okay, just just real 2 quick things. I think there was a concern from the board planner at the last meeting about was there a plan inconsistency with regard to the number of the grooming stations?
Yes, thank you, Kevin. What we did was in the grooming area, let me find this, we relocated the grooming. Easier for me to point and reference this. The later doesn't go to the computer screen. We moved the grooming area that was in the center up into this northerly part of the plan. You can see we've reduced the grooming tables down to 2 tables, and we've also reduced the grooming tubs down to 2. So we've reduced this whole area. It was pretty much a large portion of the center, and we moved it up into this area. Another concern with respect to sound was this rear door inside the door lodging. The acoustical engineer indicated that his concern was noise transmission through this one weak spot. So what we did was we removed one of the lodging bays, and we reduced that by 1, so from 15 it went down to 14. And we created a vestibule, which is simply an air chamber between the interior space and this exterior egress door, which is going to add a level of sound transmission.
Okay. There was also a question at the last hearing about, could we give more details about the air filtration system? Is that you, or is that one of our other team members?
No, I provided the board in our packet. There's essentially three air devices that are on the roof. There is a standard rooftop unit that's going to be used for the exam rooms, the common waiting areas where people are going to be. That's your typical, we had indicated a carrier unit. It could be many different vendors. And that's a standard unit, standard filter systems. Then there was another system that works hand in hand. It's called the DOAS system, and that's a dedicated air system. And that system brings in 100% air. It doesn't take air out. So that unit brings in 100% clean air, and then there is an exhaust that brings the air out. When the air comes in, that unit is used specifically for the surgical area and for the boarding and dog play areas where there could be any additional odors that would be different from the main spaces, main occupiable spaces. Those units have standard filters. Actually, the DOAS system has a HEPA filter in it. As part of that, the HEPA filter is really used for medical use only. There is no code requirement for air exchanges or filtration systems for veterinarian clinics, kennels, or anything to that effect. It's a health department issue that I've worked in other kennels before, Woodbridge Township, Helmetta, that a regular basic system on a regular maintenance, and the maintenance for the filter is on an as, depending on the space that it's being used in. So if we have a space that has a lot of different, or has a lot of activity in it, it could be a gym, it could be anything where there's different types of odors, those filters would probably be changed more often. Also, that would be very reflective in your environment that you're in. If those systems are not working or one of the units go down, you're just going to start to smell something in the building more than before you smell it outside the building. That's when it's time for repair to be done. Dr. Catalba has a facility right now that is maintained and cleaned and is in good standing. He has great reputation, so therefore if his facilities were dirty, people wouldn't be in them, and it would be an unpleasant environment. So the systems that we have are, one is a standard air system for regular occupant load for offices and so forth, the lobbies. We have another one where that's a complete fresh air intake and an air exit exhaust. That's going to be used for the surgery area and also the larger play areas. So that gives you an idea. That we also gave you two of the different types of filters that are used in the systems, and these are pretty much come from the manufacturer. So we're not trying to create anything that doesn't really exist.
And last question, and you may have already addressed this, and if you did, I apologize. I think there was a concern last time about the design of the awning. Did we do that, or we got that?
The awnings have been removed, and Mr. Sullivan acknowledged that in his review letter, that all of the awnings have been removed.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further direct questions for the witness at this time.
All right, board members, have any questions?
I just want to clarify a point. So the windows that are on the side for residential, there's two sides. Those will all be blacked out?
Those will be blacked out, and there'll be a wall built in front of them.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I have a few questions. In this play area, how many professionals will be in the room with the dogs?
I'll leave that up to the doctor to explain his staffing. I don't remember how many people.
Can we ask the doctor now?
You want me to come, or you want to finish with him, and I'll bring up the doctor now? Whatever is your pleasure.
Want to ask the question answered?
Okay.
Whatever you want to do, it's his witness, it's his presentation.
Want to bring up the doctor?
Sure, I'd like to.
Okay.
So you swear or affirm that the testimony you provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And again, state your name for the record and just spell your last name.
Sure. Thomas Caltabalota, Caltabilota.
All right, so the chairman asked how many staff members will be in the dog run area?
Yeah, so we were planning to have approximately two dedicated to that area with a float that would be jumping back and forth from the veterinary side, kind of like what we have now, to the boarding side, wherever they're needed, and depending on how many boarders or daycare pets we have per that day. Based on other boarding facilities, daycare facilities that I've spoken with, they think the magic number is about 10 per person that you have. And it doesn't mean 10 animals in there at one time. It's just that is the general capacity of what they think beyond that would be mayhem when you're taking care of a bunch of crazy dogs that are running around. So generally, that's what we're probably going to be shooting for.
Okay, are they going to be prepared if there's a dog fight?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. My staff is highly, highly trained, and we're ready to go.
Okay, okay, how many dogs? Okay, obviously the dogs are gonna poop in there.
Will not?
No, they will.
They will.
They'll have a good time.
Yeah.
Declaring territory as such, which animals do. Can you tell us the sanitation procedures in that room? Because not only will the dogs be at risk, but so will the employees.
Right. So, similar to our vet clinic now, especially with COVID, it's disinfectant and proving to the community that, our facility is safe has been pretty important. And so, we run a medical facility, so we are held to high standards and we take that seriously. For the play area, it's tough because we want the pets to understand that this is a safe place for them to urinate and defecate if they choose to, because we don't want to have a lot of activity outside. And so the area would be disinfected with a quaternary disinfectant that we would use similar to our vet clinic. Spot cleaning, completely disinfected, probably twice a day because we'd have a break in the middle of the day. And then in the evening, completely disinfected. Again, what we can smell is obviously different than what they can smell. When my pets come into the clinic, doesn't matter how good it smells, they're still searching the room for any sense of other animals and marking their territory. So, I'm at daycare facilities in the city, they don't have that problem either. The pets understand that this is where they go and they go.
Okay. With your intake and your exhaust filters, how often are they going to be changed? And will it be done by staff or will they be done professionally?
Currently, I do it now. I do it every other month, just changing the filters that we have there. I've spoken to an HVAC company that would go on like a maintenance plan because obviously this is going to be a bigger facility. And, I don't know that I want to get up there on a ladder the way I'm doing now. So I would probably contract it out to someone to a professional to do it.
And your exhaust, where's your exhaust located?
Right now, just the furnaces that goes up through the roof, so that I'm just changing those filters currently.
Okay, like if you have intake, sometimes you might have intake. And I'm concerned like where the exhaust is going out into the neighborhood, like what direction. You have houses right behind you, like you're up against houses. Is the exhaust going to be kicking out towards those houses, or is the exhaust going to be kicking out
ours currently is going straight out through the top of the building. It's not pointed in one direction or another.
Not pointed in one direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have it's interesting too because we have huge ceilings in our current space. Obviously our ceilings are only 10 feet, but above that it goes up 20 feet. And we're sharing a wall with our neighbors, zero complaints about smells, and they are literally on the other side of that wall. So,
Okay. All right, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate
Thank you.
Any board members?
Are you going to bring him up again to testify?
Yeah, he's going to come up again.
He'll be here if there's any questions, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Then there's no, from the board members, professionals, do you have any questions? Okay, do we have any questions from the public? I'm making it easy for me. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to bring up Norm Dottie.
Swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
And if you could just state your name and spell your last name for the record.
I'm Norman Dottie, D-O-T-T-I.
All right, good evening, Mr. Dottie, and as you're aware, well, for the record, can you just state your licenses and qualifications? You'll be testifying tonight as an acoustical engineer. If you could, I would assume, Mr. Chairman, I do not have a lot of experience with acoustical engineers. I'm going to assume maybe board members or members of the public don't, so if you could ramp up and give us details about your licenses and qualifications and experiences.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Norman Dottie. I'm the principal of Russell Acoustics, now in Forked River. This is my 50th year as a consulting acoustical engineer. I'm a graduate of Stevens Institute of Technology for my bachelor's degree in engineering. I have a master's from NJIT. I have a dozen postgraduate courses in acoustics. I'm an appointed member of the New Jersey State Noise Control Council that writes the noise regulations for NJDEP. I do work for municipalities as a consultant to them, developers, manufacturing sites.
Okay, what's your septic credentials?
If I may, and I have testified here before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I believe when we spoke earlier, I think at the last hearing, there was a lot of discussion about wanting to hear about technical noise information. And I think, in your words, maybe said rightly, in plain English, so we can all understand and what it means. So if you could maybe explain, I think there were some concerns about just general noise that will emanate from this site and also noise from the city, which could potentially aggravate the animals. So have you been able to look at that and consider it and study those items?
Yes, and
Okay.
other things.
Perfect.
If I may, I have the
Sure.
handouts. I don't know if you have these.
I do.
We're up there.
No, this has not been submitted. This is just part of his, that he's going to hand out tonight. Just, did you want to identify what A4 is? Is this what we're going to mark as A4?
That's the handout.
Okay.
I'm counting pages too. Or
There's one here, if anyone from the public wants to.
I believe it's 6 pages that I prepared. There's an aerial photograph. There is a second page of that is a sheet that explains the next 3 pages, which are graphs from sound measurements that I had conducted out at the site back in the end of April. And then the last page, again, is sound measurements looked at in a different way. They are not everything, but the poster up on the board there has, because
Okay.
of it doesn't have the explanatory sheet.
Okay.
And I don't know if we have them up there now. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so tell us about your analysis.
Okay, what I did, well, several things, but what these sheets or handouts are about is in the end of April, the 28th, 29th, and 30th, I went out to the site and I set up 3 environmental sound monitoring systems at 3 corners around the site. The one on 6th, the one on Memorial, and then one in the, what I call the left rear corner. In the aerial photograph, you can see little red markers showing where those 3 monitors are. Number 1 is along 6th. Number 2, which is on, so we're clear on the graphic, that's mislabeled. It says 3, that should be 2. This was a draft. And then on the front along Memorial, that's number 3. And those numbers correspond, we can flip over a couple of pages. The next page is just a brief write-up on what's shown on the typical graph that we're going to be looking at. But since I'm here, I can explain it to you instead of you having to read it. So if we look at the 3 sets of bar graphs, that covers, each graph covers 72 hours round-the-clock measurements at the 3 locations. The instruments run continuously, but since if we were taking 1-second readings, I have 86,400 measurements per day, and that's a little much to fit on a graph. So I condensed them down to hourly data. Each red vertical bar shows the range during an hour of the minimum sound level measured during that time to the maximum sound level. But when I say sound level, we're talking something called dBA, or A-weighted decibels. That's the principal metric that the state uses, that Asbury Park uses. It's probably the most commonly used measure of sound in the world. And it relates very well to how people hear sound. The blue square on each vertical bar is the average sound level during that time. The green line that jumps up and down is the day and night time limits from the state noise regulation, which are 50 dBA at night being 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., and 65 during the day. This is what a commercial operation is limited to when emitting to residential receivers. Commercial receivers are 65 all the time. That does not take into account any other sounds in the area. A source, in this case, the proposed clinic, is not responsible for the train noise or all the other sounds in the area, but those are sounds that exist out there. As you can see, I think it's pretty obvious, there are lots of times when the sound levels out there now without the clinic are well in excess of what this clinic is allowed to emit. And just as an aside, it would make for an interesting measurement situation for a compliance person to go out there and try and measure the clinic in the presence of all the other sound that's out there.
I'm sorry, can I stop you real fast?
I'm sorry?
Can I stop you real fast for a question?
Sure can.
You said this is the average for a commercial use or a residential use? The green
A
line?
commercial source emitting to residential receivers.
Okay, thank you.
The limit applies not at the source, but at the receivers, specifically where there are what the state calls affected persons. If you don't have a person, for example, you can't have a noise violation.
So this is taking into account that it's nearby residential, this is a commercial.
The limits don't care where they are. You could have a commercial establishment emitting sound, a street, another commercial operation, and then over here residents. The limits for this first commercial site still apply to the residents over there. So it's what the receiver gets, not what the source puts out, that's limited.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one quick question too? And that's measured at the residential property line, correct?
No,
It's not.
it depends where the affected receiver is.
Okay.
If you actually read all the documentation, the term at or within is used.
So it's not that, it doesn't stop at the residential
Correct.
property line. It's actually where the person.
Where the person, again, another state word is habitates.
Thanks.
I didn't make that one up. So it's a little more complicated than people think it is on the surface. Again, the idea, the basis, if you go all the way back to the enabling law on the thing, the daytime limit is based on speech interference, 65 dBA. Well, turns out that two people standing normal conversational distance apart, pre-COVID, I guess, talking in a normal conversational level, make about 65 dBA at each other's ear. So that's the basis for that. The nighttime limit of 50 is predicated on sleep disturbance. And so where people sleep actually gets figured into where things get measured. So you have the three graphs. You can see they're consistent. And as you move around towards the front along Memorial, it gets interesting out there. And in fact, the very last graph, the blue one, and you can see it up on the poster there, and it's the last one in your chart. More typically, we see sound levels that don't jump around like they do here. Of course, the primary source is the train. And so what you're seeing, these are 1 minute levels. And you can see the trains going by all day into the early morning hours, into at night. We're looking at sound levels at this location between 90 and 100 dBA. If you go to the locations in the back, which are further away, they get really quiet. They're only around 80 to 90 dBA. So what we have out there is a considerable amount of sound, and it has nothing to do with the clinic, but it's what the clinic has to exist within. And in a way, from a clinic standpoint, this is good, because if you have a very quiet area and you have any sound at all, it's noticeable. Whereas if you, in fact, that's used, they have something called masking sound systems. If you want to have, and you see it, offices are a very common place to find these things. People don't have walls anymore and things like that. So here you are trying to carry on a conversation on the telephone or an interview, where I've seen happen in doctors' offices and lawyers' offices, where you're trying to have private conversations, maybe even covered, like in the case of medical, by HIPAA. And the people sitting in the waiting room can hear the conversation. because of the nature of the building. So masking sound systems raise the background sound level. People use the term white noise. That's not quite technically what it is, but I won't go into the details unless you want them. But it makes the incoming sound less intrusive because it has to rise up high enough to get above that ambient sound, which, if adjusted properly, is not really noticeable. It's not supposed to, it's not rock music. It's a soft hiss kind of thing. And so sound, if it's too quiet, that's not good. It reduces privacy. So here you have a high ambient sound level, which means that sounds from anything else, including the clinic, is going to be less intrusive just by the nature of what's going on out there. So that's the existing conditions that we have on site. Now, as to the building itself, I have worked on a number of dog kennel, doggy daycare-like operations. For years, I worked with the Seeing Eye, which is based up in Morris Plains, on their kennels. I did, I believe it was last year, down on Route 35 in Neptune, very similar application where they took a gym, even had a swimming pool that was closed and turned it into a doggy daycare. They had another operation out in Jackson area out there. I went out and took measurements there. Dogs don't bark as much as people think they do. I'm not suggesting that dogs don't bark, but I remember at the one in Jackson, they had unlike this place where everything is indoors, they had an outdoor dog walk, and people would take the dogs out and walk them around the yard for exercise. And I was out there taking measurements of barking dogs, except I couldn't get the dogs to bark. Nobody barked. I couldn't get measurements outside. I could get measurements inside. So at this one in Neptune now, everything is enclosed. There's nothing outside other than a parking lot. And we went through the same kind of drill there. The sound levels with the walls, proper windows, things like that, the neighbors don't hear it. It just doesn't happen. And this is the way the modern, again, I have to use the term doggy daycare, that's why I think of it as, that kind of facility where there's boarding and dog care and things like that. And the modern ones are all being built as enclosed facilities. They don't have, generally, outdoor runs where the dogs can go. And that's what this is proposed to be. So when I looked at the proposed drawings, and you've heard tonight some of the effects about relocating some of the activities and the sort, the idea that the boarding spaces, pens, I'm not sure what to call them, are up against the left rear corner wall. That had me concerned, not because of the walls themselves, but they're substantial masonry walls. But the windows are the obvious thing. Windows in buildings of all types, this building here, residential structures, etc., they're the weak link. When people want to have less sound coming into their house, they say, well, how about if I just put another layer of drywall on the wall? Nope, won't do any good, because the windows are your weak link. You have to do something about the windows. So what we proposed was using a double glass laminated, that's important, it's laminated glass, which acts as a damping material on the glass, and a wider airspace. The airspace is important because if you can picture, we have a panel here, whether it's a glass pane, whether it's a wall between two spaces, we have a panel. Sound comes against the panel, the pane, and it moves it. Not that you can see it, but it moves it. That in turn moves the air on the other side. That's how the transmission takes place. Then we have another wall. Well, that moving air in there in space moves the wall on the other side, which in turn moves the wall over where the neighbor is, or outside. Well, as you put that space closer and closer together, that air gap becomes less and less compressible, a stiffer spring, which means when the first wall moves, it's more likely to move the second wall. So airspace matters along with other factors in an acoustical barrier. And if you take the window and you stick in a triple pane in there, You just cut down on the airspace, and actually for the window that's been proposed with the double glass laminated, it has more sound attenuation than the triple pane window from the same vendor. And overall, the windows are a better window to begin with. Then, on top of that, they propose building another wall inside. So against the outer wall, where you have a window, that whole thing is going to be covered up with a floor-to-ceiling solid wall, which almost doubles the effectiveness of the whole structure. If you take two layers and smack them together, you have one layer, put another layer on top, like let's put another layer of gypsum board on top of what we already have. That only gets you about a 6 decibel improvement in the sound retardation abilities of the thing. So let's say this wall we have, like between the doctor's existing clinic and his neighbor's now, let's say hypothetically that's good for 45 decibels of sound reduction. If I put another layer of gypsum board on top of it, oh wow, one layer did that, then 2 layers will give me 90, right? Doesn't work that way. But it'll take it theoretically from 45 to about 51. But if I put another wall up there, another 45 dB wall with a 3-inch air gap in between the two, that double wall now is worth about 80 decibels. So there's some magic happening in there. It's back to that decoupling kind of thing again. So by putting another wall, separate wall, instead of just thicker glass, it's much more effective than you would ever get out of what you could do with glass in there. If it were my choice, I said, why don't you just brick the thing up? But I was told that y'all wanted to have windows on the outside to see, at least from an architectural standpoint. So I can get along with that. But what's been proposed makes that a very substantial wall. Another thing was the doors. On the rear side, the doors were proposed to be their single doors. I said double doors, vestibule. You can do them back to back with a space in between. You can do a separate room with a vestibule. That's if you think of an airlock on a spaceship, we have 2 doors and a cavity. Well, this is a sound lock, if you will. And that's one of the things that we recommend and has been implemented. Another thing is the ceiling. The plan was and is for a suspended ceiling. Very common kind of thing. There's a high ceiling up top. It's a concrete deck up there. So a lot of mass. You stop sound with mass. That's good. But just to be safe, I'll say, the ceiling tile is an interesting thing. Most ceiling tiles are there, and the acoustical effect that they provide is something called absorption. They prevent the reflection of sound, but they are not sound barriers. Absorption is not a sound barrier. So the typical ceiling tile, if you look at its ratings, it has an absorption rating, something called the NRC, but that's all they talk about. But there are classes of ceiling tiles that are used that also are sound attenuators. They're heavier. They usually have a backing material on them. I've seen them with even like a 1/2-inch layer of gypsum board applied to each ceiling tile. And those have what's called a CAC rating, Ceiling Acoustical Class, I believe it stands for. And that's a measure of how the ceiling tile, which still has to do an absorption job, and it does, retards sound going up into the plenum space and then further up against the concrete ceiling. Hence the recommendation for a ceiling tile with a good CAC rating, and what they picked is a commercial product from Armstrong as a CAC rating, I believe, of 35. Let's see. Windows, ceiling. That's one.
Double doors, okay.
That's it?
Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my direct questioning of this, subject to any future questions.
Thank you, sir. Do board members have any questions?
Yeah, I have a few. Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, please.
So these other sites that you visited, you testified that the neighbors haven't complained, and I know it's a different site, but you did testify that there weren't any complaints. Was it the same proximity as this proposed site to residential's?
The one in Neptune's a little further away. Depends, and as you know, at this site, if you've been there, look carefully at an aerial, the homes that are down Memorial towards, I guess it would be Fifth, face, again, assuming it's Fifth, this sort of front on Fifth, and there's a rear yard space. So the big there. On the 6th Ave side, they're closer there.
So, because I mean, I know you talked about the one in Jackson. I've actually been to that one, and it's like, there's not a house probably within 10 acres of the site, so.
I wasn't there for complaints, I was there to get data.
Yeah, and I hear you that the dogs were not as loud, but this site, I mean, you're telling us that the site's already very noisy, so.
They're not, I apologize for interrupting, but the vet clinic is not responsible for the sound that's out there now.
I know, but we have to decide if this is an appropriate site for the use that's not permitted. So that's, seeing this, that it's already a very noisy site. I'm not sure, I get what you're testifying, that it's not a quiet site, so bringing in loud noises won't. You feel free to jump in, because I'm trying to absorb.
I'm not suggesting we're bringing in loud sounds. I'm saying any sounds that escape from there compared to what's out there now are 40 to 50 decibels quieter than what's out there now, but they still have to comply. They won't, I have every confidence that they will not exceed the limit at the neighbors. With the things that are being done in there, I would be surprised if standing outside you could even hear it, but that's not what the standard is.
And how are you so confident? Because of the...
What's being done, the structure.
Okay.
The double doors, the ceiling, the windows.
The extra gypsum.
These windows, for example, are I guess I would say pleasantly surprised when the architect told me about the extra wall. Because I was looking at it initially of, okay, if I have to have windows there, what can I do to comply with just windows? And Mr. Testa comes along and says, oh, and by the way, we're going to put up these walls in front of them. I said,
Okay.
I've never literally done that.
Who said we didn't want windows, by the way? Was that your client? Because I don't think anyone on the board's ever said that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a question for you.
Yeah, I think you indicated that maybe you said, hey, we should brick the whole thing up, but there was
That was my feeling, but I was told that people wanted to see windows there.
Probably my client.
No, it wasn't you, and it's nothing that I read.
Sure.
I'm just saying it's nothing that we've ever suggested.
Correct.
So I just wanted to get it on the record. Okay. Oh, my last question. So you threw out a lot of numbers, and again, I'm just trying to follow because this is new to me. What is the number that you project is going to be coming out of the building?
Well, I didn't do all the math for that, but certainly no more than 50. I would, being conservative, 40 if you could measure it. Remember, if you look at the graphs, try 40. Let's take one of the ones on the back. This is 40 down here.
Which one are you looking at?
That 3's on the front. Let's go back in one, either one of the two. Pick number 1. It says number 1, South Avenue corner. Okay. 40 is the one line above the baseline. You see what I'm looking at?
What's the baseline? 30?
Baseline is 30. I should put my glasses on. If he's making the print smaller.
Not quite.
Yes. The x-axis here is 30. The next one up that's marked, if you look on either side, you'll see a 40 there. And the next one up is the 50, which is the nighttime limit.
So what's the point of that? Sorry, you lost me.
I'm sorry?
What's the point of
The
that?
point is that if we're doing 40, if we can meet 40, look at what else is going on out there.
Oh, okay. And you're saying 40 is projected based on the architecture material that
Yes.
they're,
And I have, over the years, I've also measured dogs barking and sort of.
and one more time, I know you've already said this, but I'm trying to understand it. This is the regulations for any kind of noise coming towards a residence.
It's the limit is for a commercial source emitting to a residential receiver. That's by use, not by zoning.
Right.
We're clear on that.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Anyone else on the board?
No, I do just have to say that I think that this was extremely informative.
Yeah, it was.
Absolutely.
Good.
It was really good.
So basically, you're saying that the noise that is emitting from the inside will not be heard on the outside?
I think that's highly likely. I'm one of those who never says never.
Okay, but the chances of it happening?
I think it's really minimal. From hanging around attorneys too much, I use the phrase, to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty.
Okay, all right.
And Mr. Chairman, I did not even know that there was a noise council in the state of New Jersey. So I learned many things.
Okay. We have any questions from professionals, please?
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So I just want to understand something, maybe this will help your question. If Mike and I are talking at the same level, and a third person comes in and is talking with us at the same level, is that going to change the number that you're putting out in decibels? Because a third person is now coming?
When you're pointing, you're not talking about the graphs or
I'm
anything
not
like
talking
that.
about I'm talking about the decibel level.
Okay, just in general.
Yeah.
Talking really
So
what I call
hypothetical.
decibel math.
Michael and I are talking at the same level. Third person comes in, talks at the same level.
Right.
Are you, what are
Where
you reading?
if now you have two people talking at the same time, okay, if we're being polite, taking turns, then it doesn't change anything. But if two people are talking at you, let's say, we're each about 3 feet away from you, both talking at you at the same time, what are you hearing? Are you hearing 65? Well, the way it works, decibel arithmetic, is if you add two sources at the same sound level, the 265s, for example, it goes up by 3 decibels. 250s, it goes up by 3 decibels. If you have 10 50s, it goes up by 10 decibels.
Does that assume the same frequency of?
The same nature, same basic sounds. Yeah, there are special cases.
Like harmony.
Well, it's very rare in the real world to have in-phase sounds. If you were generating sine waves, zapping him with a sound wave.
It happens all the time.
That I would like to hear. So it doesn't add up the way people think it does. That's a not uncommon question. They think, well, gee, if it's 50 out there now and you come along and make 50, that's 100, right?
Right, yeah, I didn't think it was going to be.
It's not like money in the bank, no.
The other question I have is, so in this scenario, if you're thinking it's going to be 40 to 50, and you have readings of 80, is that going to change that 80?
No.
To help?
One
In
other
fact,
question you made.
the state, the way the state has in the regulation also has measurement procedures, and in the state process, you go out there and you take a measurement of what they call the neighborhood residual, or normal people call the ambient, and that's without the source in question on, what they call source off. You measure a sound level, and then you measure, because you can't turn the neighborhood off, you measure the source plus the neighborhood residual, and then you subtract them off. Well, you have to do a decibel subtraction there. You don't say, well, the ambient is 45, and with the source on it's 50, so if I take 45 from 50, well, they're only making 5 decibels. Doesn't work that way. When the residual, the ambient, is 10 or more decibels below the source, you don't even bother to subtract it off. It's so insignificant.
So what did you use for your data for the source?
What, for these, for this?
No, for the source, this is the ambient, right?
That's what's out there now.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about
Oh,
that.
I assume
But inside the building, what's the source?
barking dogs at 100 dBA.
And how many dogs?
Well, if you could get them all singing together in a chorus, that's you know, they're barking when it's happening. If you get them all whipped up, which I've had to do sometimes to get them to bark, then it's bark, 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 bark. It's just firing off here and there, and you're looking at the meter and grabbing the peaks and the sort. It's around 100 dBA for a cluster of them.
What's a cluster though?
I'm sorry?
What's a cluster if you had to approximate a number?
How many? Oh, 20.
So, can I follow up on that? I don't know. So if you're assuming that the source, which is within this building
Mhm.
at 100 dBA,
Mhm.
right? You've got the brick wall, you've got the windows. What is that reduced to by virtue of those?
It's, I didn't do all that math because it's takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money to do it. I'm going from experience. Remember that in New Jersey, the building code calls for a 50 decibel sound STC between residential spaces. So, which isn't all that much, really. So here we're looking at a reduction of at least 60, 70 decibels with that wall construction. You can't just subtract the numbers. You can sort of subtract. You know, if you take 70 from 100, it's 30, but it's more complicated than that.
But that puts you into a range that you feel
Yes.
comfortable of not exceeding
Yeah,
the residential standard.
right. Not just not exceeding the residential standard, but being, I think, noticeably better than that. This is really a substantial construction. As I said to the one lady's question, I've never done one this extreme.
Is there a difference in characterization in terms of the state, in terms of sounds that are continuous versus sounds that are not continuous?
An impulsive sound,
Right.
which an individual dog bark really is, unless the dog can drag that out for long enough time. Impulse sounds have a limit of 80.
So they have a higher threshold because
Correct.
they're of a short duration?
Correct.
Any other questions from professionals? Okay, do we have any questions from the public? No? Okay, thank you, sir.
All right,
Thank you.
if you wouldn't mind sticking around. Tom Muller, I'd like to recall. He's our engineer.
Mr. Mello, you were sworn in, recognized as an expert engineer at the last hearing, but do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And for the record, state your name and spell your last name.
Thomas Muller, M-U-L-L-E-R.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Muller, just as we did with Mr. Testa, if you wouldn't mind briefly reciting some of the engineering revisions which were made based on the conversations and questions and concerns of the last hearing.
Yes, absolutely. Just as Mr. Testa said, we heard the board loud and clear at the last meeting. We spent some time over the last few weeks and month revising the plans to address a lot of the comments that we heard. Just quickly going through a few of the bullet items. One of the concerns we heard was about the lighting design. So we spent some time completely redesigning the lighting. We chose completely new light fixtures for this project. So the parking area lights and the building mounted lights on the front sides of the building, which would be the north side of the building and the east side of the building, have completely been revised to be an architectural light that's completely downward facing, non-glare, no kind of spillover or anything like that. And then along the rear of the building, which is the west side of the site, which is along the residential property line on the top of the exhibit on the easel, those lights were also revised to be very small cylinder lights. And those lights will also be on motion sensors. Those lights will only be used for the very limited amount of time that an employee goes out there to access the refuse area. And those lights have also been designed to prevent any kind of light spillover to the adjacent property line. I could touch on in a few minutes that also resulted in the reduction of a number of design waivers, but just to keep this simple, I'll go through all the design waivers at one point, just to go through those. Another significant change that happened to this project is we removed the underground detention basin that was previously proposed. We revised the stormwater design completely to use pervious asphalt pavement. I think I do need to mark this exhibit, actually. This is a site plan rendering.
So we are up to A5, and just identify what A5 is, Tom?
A5 is a site plan rendering prepared by Dynamic Engineer Consultants dated May 14, 2022. This is a colorized site plan rendering of the site plan layout. It's very similar to the previous site plan rendering that was presented at the last meeting. I'll just be referring to it quickly through this summary. But the entire parking area that we are proposing is now pervious pavement. The city ordinance requires that 2 gallons of storage be provided for all new impervious coverage on the site. So this project does provide that. It's nearly 13,000 gallons of storage that we're proposing now with this pervious pavement system. The pervious pavement's 6 inches thick. It's above a 12-inch thick crushed gravel stone layer. And within that gravel stone is a perforated pipe. So we have stormwater runoff that hits the parking area and it infiltrates into the pervious pavement, hits that gravel layer, is stored. There's a treatment system that goes through that drainage as we get into the stone area. Then eventually it does drain through that perforated pipe and connects to an off-site drainage connection. This is designed with the BMP, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, BMP guidelines in mind. I do believe your board engineer reviewed this design. I believe he is generally comfortable with it, but I'd be happy to talk about it in more detail. Another change was that we added a bike rack to this project. It's located on the eastern side of the site, which is on the lower side, the bottom of the page. It's immediately adjacent to the entrance into the facility. It is a large bike rack that has a capacity for 16 bikes. So that is going to be accessible for the customers of the facility as well as employees of the facility. We added additional landscaping around the perimeter of the parking area to help shield it even more than what was previously proposed. As Mr. Testa mentioned, we removed the awnings and canopies from the front of the building, which actually results in the removal of 1 front yard variance that was previously proposed. So we have no awnings, and now we have no front yard setback variance requirement. Mr. Testa also mentioned signage has been significantly reduced. Now we just have 2 very modest wall-mounted signs at the 2 entrances of the building. We removed the corner wall signs that kind of hugged the corners of the buildings. The signs have also been revised to be externally illuminated. I'll touch on this in a minute in terms of the design waivers, but that also results in the reduction of a number of design waivers that are required. So this is going to be an externally illuminated sign with basically gooseneck lights that modestly light that sign for visibility. And finally, we also removed a design waiver by shifting the proposed fence along the top property line, which is the west property line on the top of the page. We pulled that 1 foot off the property line to meet the design requirements in the city ordinance. And we also provided a gate that connects between that proposed fence and the northwest corner of the building to help visually screen the refuse area from the public right-of-way as well as the parking area. Just from a high level, those are the major changes that we made. to the project. I could just touch quickly on the design waivers and variances if you'd like, or get into any more detail on the changes that we did make.
Do you have a preference, or? Let me just ask two quick questions. Just, I know that member Barbara had asked about if, with the landscaping, if you could plant it at full height, and I believe our client was totally acceptable that would be, so that we wouldn't plant at minimum height, we would plant at full height.
Yes.
Okay. And I also,
Excuse me, just what does that mean?
instead of having, well, I'll let you answer, instead of having the plant when they're young and have to grow up, I think there was a request that we plant full mature landscaping.
Yeah, so the shrubbery around the perimeter of the parking area would be planted at 3-foot height. It wouldn't be planted at anything lower than that. 3 feet is generally the height that's required to block headlights. So we'd propose 3-foot high plantings along the perimeter of the parking area.
I also think that there was a question from the board as to maybe go back and I think there was a specific question, do you need decorative lighting on the, I think on the one side of the building? I think that was removed, correct?
Correct. Along the western property line, we removed the large lights and we replaced them with very small motion censored lights.
And I think somewhere along the line at the last hearing, there was a question about if the board wanted the bicycle rack, if we wanted that to be weather protected. I think our client said that that would be fine.
This is actually proposed as just a standard bicycle rack. We don't want to propose a canopy over it at this time. For aesthetic purposes, Mr. Testa and Mr. Sullivan have gone through great lengths to make this a very beautiful building. We don't want to propose a full structure over the bike rack. If customers are riding their bikes during a rainstorm, they're gonna get much more wet getting to the site than their bike sitting there. So customers generally don't ride their bikes when it's raining out. If employees ride bikes to the facility, the applicant has made provisions to provide indoor bike storage inside the actual building for his employees. So the weather conditions consideration of the bike rack is addressed through those two means.
And I believe board member Tim had a question about the other possible locations for the garbage storage area, but I think why are you keeping it where you're keeping it?
Yeah, we're keeping it along the western property line. As I mentioned before, we added a gate to the front facade of the buildings to block that area. That location is really ideal because it's the only location on site that's within the envelope of the building setbacks. Anything beyond, especially along the southern property line, would be within that setback line. So that is really the ideal place on the west side of the site. And it also serves directly to the sidewalk area, which could allow employees to bring out the receptacles to the road. So it's completely screened by landscaping, fencing. It's within the allowable setbacks. And it really is the ideal place for those refuse areas.
Can we jump back to the bicycle rack for just one second?
Sure.
Mr. Testa presented the elevations, the revised elevations that haven't been submitted yet as an exhibit tonight, showing the symmetrical wall and then the ramp off to the side with plantings to be in front of it. But the rendering here shows the bicycle rack on a pad, and that pad goes right up to the wall. And there's no room for those plantings, which would need to be associated with each of those flanking walls. So can there be a gap between that pad and the new flanking wall so that you can actually get the plant material in there, so that the plant material, the walls go together in a symmetrical composition?
Yes, absolutely. We could work with Mr. Testa in your office to provide that planting area.
Thank you.
So you designed the trash can areas for the employees to take it out. What if the applicant hired a private company to do recycling and trash? Could this site fit that?
Yes, a private hauler, or even if the city refuse company took it, it would be from 6th Avenue or Memorial Drive, but the applicant has designed it to be on the west side of the site, so refuse would be picked up on 6th Avenue directly from the right-of-way. Just very similar to any of the surrounding residential areas or the surrounding commercial areas.
Would the applicant be amenable to moving that, the recycling and the trash to the east side of the driveway? So
Yes.
that it is not in the right-of-way of the neighbors?
Yes, absolutely. We could identify a staging area on the east side of that driveway on 6th
Great.
Avenue, which could be
That's-
certainly enforceable by
That's pretty important
city.
with what's coming out of that facility.
Yes, absolutely. I see no issue with that.
And if you could give, do you have the numbers? I know that you talked about pervious and impervious surfaces. Do you have the percentages? Because I know what the percentages were before we started. Do you know what the percentages are now?
Of the pervious pavement to,
Yes. And what the requirements are? Because I think that the requirements are, I think it was 65%, and you were much higher than that for impervious before. So you were like at 77 or 79. So we'd like to know what's your number now?
we're still at 78% impervious. We're considering the pervious pavement as impervious for purpose of zoning calculations. So we're being conservative with our impervious coverage calculation for zoning calculation purpose. So we're still at 78%.
So you included the pervious pavement as impervious?
Yes, correct.
Why?
That's my understanding of how we calculate impervious coverage for city ordinance. We could reduce it, and it could reduce that 78% number down to something less.
Well, then you wouldn't need a variance.
Right.
If it's the board's interpretation that we would subtract out pervious pavement from the impervious calculation.
I mean, I don't know what's normal. Let's just say,
No, it counts towards the requirement, but, I mean, hypothetically, if you were to discount a pervious pavement, do you have any idea what the number might be?
And what's your surface area of the pervious pavement?
I would have to circle back with the exact number, but just very roughly speaking, it's about 5,000 or 6,000 square feet of pervious pavement. So the total amount of impervious that's proposed, including the pervious pavement, is about 17,500 square feet for the entire project. Of that 17,000 square feet, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 of it is pervious pavement.
so 35, 30%?
It's definitely less than 5,000.
35%?
You're a minor development, so it's probably
Yeah.
close to 5, but under.
The building, I'm basing this based on the building is 12,000 square feet. Our total impervious coverage is 17,500. So 17,500 minus 12,000, I'm just saying 5,000 to 6,000. I don't have the exact number, I apologize, but
So it's pretty significant, the improvements that you've made.
oh, yes.
The only issue is now, and this is up to our professionals, obviously, like, how do we take advantage of that? Meaning that do you need variances? Does that create something else if we don't count it as such? But that's up to you guys. But I think that it's important for us to know that we're down now to roughly 30, let's say worst case, 40%.
Yeah, if we take
of
advantage of the
impervious,
pervious pavement, it's
And
significantly.
that's a
yeah.
significant change.
Yes.
That's
The
good.
definition of impervious surface is a surface that has been covered with a layer of material so that it is highly resistant to infiltration by water.
Yeah, I'll be honest, in my experience with that type of definition, that's a very common definition, is that pervious pavement still counts as impervious coverage for purposes of being conservative for zoning calculations. I greatly appreciate if the board makes the interpretation that you can reduce the impervious coverage calculation by subtracting out the pervious pavement. That would help, that would remove the variance requirement. But just for purposes of being conservative, to provide testimony tonight, we are still considering that impervious coverage variance in case someone makes the interpretation that it still counts as impervious.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't think that's up to us.
My legal opinion
Yeah.
is that if your board engineer says it has to be calculated as your impervious, you have to calculate it. However, if there is an approval, we could indicate in the approval, I think we need an exact number, but we could indicate in the approval of that X amount of square feet is going to be impervious pavement based on the representation of the applicant.
And if we were fortunate to get the approval, we would clearly agree with that condition. So, Tom, did you want to just quickly identify what the waivers are that we need still?
Sure. I'll utilize Mr. Sullivan's letter dated May 17th, 2022. He does a very good job of outlining the variances and waivers starting on page 25 under section 11, summary of relief. In terms of the variances, I won't get into too much detail on these, but obviously we have the use variance. The applicant's planner will be up to discuss that shortly, but the use is obviously related to the proposed veterinary use. Signs in the residential zone is still a variance that is required. However, as I mentioned, we did significantly reduce the signage package. We removed the corner signs. We removed the internally illuminated sign, and now it's just simply an externally illuminated sign. It's about 53 square feet on the northern side of the building, and then 53 square feet on the eastern side of the building, just above the two entrances. Very modest sign design to identify the site.
I'm sorry, what's the square footage again? I'm sorry?
The signs are about 53.75 square feet in size. They're rectangular above the entrances.
I think that, what's allowed for business? Because we just did this last night. Was
was
it
40.
like 60 or was it?
Was it 40?
I don't remember.
No, you're right.
For the
It was more
city-
than- They were proposing 40.
Right.
Um,
I think it
it
was
was 60.
closer in the 60 range.
Yeah, I think it
So
was
you're in that, you're in the range of other zones. Okay.
And then impervious coverage variance, we just talked about, that's related to the requirement that we need to build a parking area here. So it's triggered by that. Then to get into the design exceptions, there is a level of interpretation that needs to be made with a number of these. I won't dwell on them in great length, but I'll go through them quickly. The parking arrangement requirement is noted here as a design exception. It really is up to the interpretation of the board professionals as well as my professional opinion, that the parking arrangement is required to be safe and efficient based on city ordinance. That's essentially what this ordinance section says. In my professional opinion, this parking area is certainly designed to be safe and efficient. The drive aisles, the parking aisle widths, the parking area locations, the building entrances, everything are designed within industry standards. The site will certainly work in terms of circulation for vehicles to get in and out of the parking stalls and through the driveways. There was a concern with the location of the ADA stall and a car backing out of that ADA stall. We did do an analysis and did confirm that it's a parking or a car that leaves that parking space does not have to back out all the way to Memorial Drive. It really just has to back out the first few feet of that parking stall, stays completely within the boundaries of the property, and then it moves to the top of the page and leaves the site. So in my opinion, this is a safe and efficient parking arrangement, and this design exception, in my opinion, is technically not required, but in the event that it is still required based on the board's interpretation, I think the variance justification is certain, or the waiver justification is certainly justifiable based on the way it's designed. The conflicting parking area entranceway design waiver, this also goes hand in hand with what I just mentioned in terms of the ADA reverse movement. We did do an analysis and did confirm that the car does not need to exit back out onto the street to use this parking area. So it's my testimony that that design waiver is not required anymore. The driveway width design exception, I believe we touched on this in detail at the last meeting. The ordinance requirement is that we need an 18-foot wide driveway. However, we're only providing a 16-foot driveway. The ordinance also only requires a 16-foot drive aisle once you get into the site. So what we discussed at the last hearing was that we just kept that uniform width from the driveway into the drive aisle. It's certainly suitable for this particular situation. The extra 2 feet in that driveway would not improve the operation of that driveway significantly, so the way it's designed is certainly suitable. The next two design waivers, non-glare lights and lights not fully shielded. Those two design exceptions in my opinion, are also being removed based on the new lighting fixture that we selected for the project. I believe Michael Sullivan did review the new lighting. I don't want to speak for him, but I believe he does agree with that interpretation.
These, just to be clear, these have not been submitted to the board yet. They were provided in the board's package as an exhibit.
No, the new light is included in the new site plan package. It's part of a construction detail and part of the lighting isometric analysis that we submitted to the board.
Those waivers are no longer necessary. The lights are fully shielded from the non-glare.
The lighting color temperature, we are proposing a 3000 Kelvin light. The ordinance requires a 2700 Kelvin light. We did spend a substantial amount of time analyzing different lights. Our first and foremost goal here was to get these lights to be non-glare, fully shielded. To find a light that's also 2700 K has proven to be impossible, in my opinion. So we did select a light that's 3000 Kelvin. In commercial settings like this, it is the industry standard. The difference between a 2700 Kelvin light and a 3000 Kelvin light is insignificant to the naked eye. I don't think you would even notice that the difference is there. So unfortunately, we do still need this design waiver based on the other lighting requirements that we are trying to accomplish. So we are respectfully requesting that design waiver. The illumination levels at the property line design waiver is also still required because we do have minor overlap of the lighting along the public right-of-ways on 6th Avenue and Memorial Ave. We don't have any light spill over to the residential property lines, which are on the western and southern portions of the property. It's completely zero at those property lines, but completely technically speaking, we do still need the waiver because we have very slight overlap at the driveway areas on 6th Avenue and Memorial.
Are those the only places where there's spillage?
Yes.
Okay, and that's where it should be?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We're being extremely strict and conservative with that design
It's
waiver.
related to the parking lot.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's really from the corner of the building wrapping around 6th Avenue.
Okay.
Yep. The lighting level waiver on the top of page 26 is also still required. There's very specific minimum, average, maximum to minimum ratios that the ordinance requires. This is a very small parking area, a very small site, essentially. We're doing our best to provide a modest lighting design while preventing the spillover to adjacent properties to the maximum extent practical. So we are requesting a design waiver from those ratios that are required by the ordinance. The lighting that we are proposing is very uniform. It's absolutely sufficient for this type of use. It won't be obnoxious. It's not too bright. It's a very modest lighting design, so we are respectfully requesting that waiver as well. The parking lot screening design waiver is also, in my opinion, a relatively subjective design waiver. We are proposing completely surrounded parking areas by landscaping. We do have shrubbery. As I mentioned, we'll be proposing it at 3-foot height along the perimeter of this parking area. The ordinance is somewhat vague as to what the true definition of fully screened parking area is. One could make an argument that we need to propose a fence and very tall plantings and things of that nature, but I think we'd agree that we don't want to completely block this building. This is a very beautiful building. So we are proposing 3-foot high landscape shrub rows to completely block those parking stalls, which will be suitable for blocking headlights, and will also provide a nice filter to the site while still highlighting the beautiful building behind it. So we are requesting that waiver. The next
question on that. So the parking spaces to the west, you will not be able to see through because of that wall, right?
Correct. We have a 6-foot high solid vinyl fence.
Okay.
We also have a
Solid, not,
yeah, it's a solid vinyl fence, completely solid, 6 feet in height. And then beyond that, we also have an evergreen row of shrubs, which will generally be planted at 6 to 8 feet in height, and it'll just grow over time. So it's doubly buffered on the western property line.
how are you not meeting it then? Is it because of what's on 6th?
Yeah, just based on 6th and Memorial Drive, just truly a strict conservative reading of the ordinance would require this design waiver because the parking area is not fully screened from 6th Avenue with a tall buffer. It's just screened with a 3-foot high shrub row, which is more than adequate for this a project of this nature.
And the reality is, that shrubs are never opaque, right? You're always gonna see something, you're always gonna get some headlight splash through there. So if you're using plant material, you're generally gonna always need an exception from this if you're not using an architectural feature. Because they actually have to plant within the right of way, correct?
Correct.
And you need city permission, they're not gonna be building a wall around there to opaquely screen everything. So there are gaps, it's not completely opaque, so therefore it doesn't meet the standard.
Correct.
So, wait, something you just said, there's gonna be shrubbery in the city right of way?
That's
That's
correct.
what's proposed?
They testified to it.
All right, I just wanna make sure I have my own notes right. Okay.
I just have a quick question too. While we're talking about the western property line, there's lights that go on and off, motion activated. Is there a fence along that property line between our property and the neighbor? To the west on 6th?
An existing fence or a proposed fence?
How long is the proposed fence? Is it along the entire property line?
It looks like it ends at the door that's kind of at the midpoint of the building, and then there's another egress behind it and a couple more lights.
Yeah, it does end at that door, and then beyond that door, as you move south along that property line, is that adjacent residential property, and they have a garage with a 0-foot setback. It's a small building, so we didn't continue it through there. We didn't want to conflict with that structure, but it does continue all the way up to the door as proposed from the exit there.
If you have central lights there, how long are they gonna stay on for? How will they be adjusted?
That time's actually not determined yet. If the board had a preference, we could certainly consider that and add it as a note on the plans, but just in general, 5 or 10 minutes, just very brief to allow people to take out refuse and go back into the building. It's motion censored, just like a residential use. It's just a very short amount of time.
Does that light reflect on the nearby property?
No, it's been designed, even when it's on, to have no reflection onto the neighboring properties. It's really just to light that sidewalk along the back of the property, just for safety purposes. The next couple design waivers, the next 4 actually, required loading area size, number of loading spaces, and loading area sign. Those are required as design waivers, simply because we're not proposing a loading area. If this was a more intense commercial use and that needed a loading area, we would have to provide that loading area, but this is a veterinary clinic. The doctor provided some detailed testimony about his existing operation. This is only getting very simple deliveries on a weekly basis that could easily be served by the parking stalls on the property. So we are respectfully requesting those design waivers simply because we're not providing a loading area. The next one is signs in a residential district. This ordinance section is the same as referenced in the variance section that I just mentioned. So while it is a sign variance.
It's already taken care of.
Yeah, it's not technically a waiver as well. So that's taken care of. Great. The sign lighting emission is no longer a design waiver. As I mentioned earlier, we're not providing an internally illuminated sign. It's an externally illuminated sign. So that design waiver is no longer required. The quantification of waste is technically a design waiver. The applicant, has provided testimony at the previous meeting. He does operate an existing facility. We did provide 4 enclosures for the site, which is shown on here. There is the provision to allow for more enclosures in the rear of that site if necessary. You can see on the property line, and the building wall on the western side, we do show those 4 rectangles or squares. There is a little bit of extra space if 1 or 2 more had to be added over time, but it is our opinion that the 4 that are provided will certainly be suitable for the operation. And as I mentioned before, the refuse pickup will be managed by the applicant, so that can be monitored over time. If anything further is required for quantification of waste, a statement could be provided to the board professionals, perhaps as a condition of approval to satisfy that design waiver.
If you had 6 trash cans, would you need the waiver?
That's the problem with this type of use. It's such a unique type of use that if 6 were provided, it's my opinion that 4 is adequate. So if 6 were provided, that would be more than adequate. The design waiver is really required because the ordinance simply requires that the applicant provide a quantity of waste. And again, we're being strictly conservative with this. No one can predict exactly how much waste is going to be here. We're doing our best professional opinion on what we think based on his current operation. So just strictly speaking, we are requesting the design waiver because you can't provide the exact quantification of the waste on a daily basis. Again, that goes right into my 1-week recyclable storage design waiver here. It's exactly with what I just said. We are providing the 4 receptacles, which is our opinion that it is acceptable, but we are respectfully requesting the design waiver because it is essentially impossible to quantify the total waste at this time. The view of the waste receptacles, in my opinion, is also not required any longer because we are providing that solid gate along the western property line, so no one will be able to see these receptacles. They're completely enclosed by a fence and shrubbery. The contrast of ambient light levels, that's related to the sign ordinance as well. We are removing that design waiver because we are doing an externally illuminated sign. So that design waiver, in my opinion, is no longer required. The parking area shade tree requirement is also somewhat subjective. This ordinance section requires that we shade the parking area to the maximum extent practicable. We are proposing, as you can see on Exhibit A5 on the rendering, there is an existing shade tree row along 6th Avenue as well as Memorial Drive. We are removing 2 sycamore trees. We are proposing a total of 3 additional sycamore trees. So we're continuing that solid shade tree row along the public right-of-way. So we are providing in my opinion, the maximum extent practical amount of shade trees, as you can see on this rendering. These canopies are completely touching. It's a completely solid row of shade trees along the frontages of the property. To confirm that the parking area is completely shaded by shade trees, it's not really something that we could expressly quantify at this time. So in the event that this design waiver is required based on the board professional's opinion, we are respectfully requesting it.
Just an explanation. Shade trees don't count as parking lot trees, and there may be practical difficulties because of the position of those shade trees along the street to actually installing shade. I'm not saying there is, that's his testimony, but if it's a parking lot tree, to count towards a parking lot, it's got to be associated with the parking lot, so an exception is required.
But in this case, like in other cases, we've seen that if you have X amount of parking spaces, you need X amount of parking trees.
Right.
Shade trees in the parking lot. Is there such a thing here?
In or around, right?
Right.
In or nearby proximity.
All right, so based on how many parking spaces are here, is there a requirement
It's
to have?
10 would require 3 trees.
So the exception is 3 trees.
The exception is
We can't provide 3 trees.
They provided a street tree and then 2 other shade trees on the front of the building.
But not in
But
the
not
parking
associated
lot.
with the
That's why
parking
there's
lot.
a.
That's the difference.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. The next bullet is the illumination of white and blue light. That design waiver is no longer required. That's related to the internally illuminated white and blue sign that was previously proposed. Now it's an externally illuminated sign. That design waiver is no longer required. Finally, the truck pickup of waste. Believe the ordinance requires that the site be serviced by a truck on the site. Technically, this will be served by a truck on the street because of the size of the site. As I mentioned before, it's a very similar operation to any of the adjacent uses or uses in the surrounding area. So there is a design waiver required there simply because we are using the public right-of-way to pick up refuse. Just quickly, there's 2 additional waivers that I just want to put on the record just for purposes of being complete here. There is a design waiver required for the parking area setback per ordinance section 30-59.11. That ordinance section simply says that you can't have parking in the front setback. Obviously, we have the parking in the setback. It's the ideal place for the parking here based on the configuration of the site. So there is technically a design waiver. I think I've provided substantial testimony along the lines of the layout and the things that we've done to buffer the parking from visual impact to the streets. And then finally, ordinance section 30-59.13.a.4 requires a 50-foot driveway separation to adjacent intersecting streets. We are proposing a 28-foot setback to the driveway on Memorial Drive, which is on the bottom of the page, to 6th Avenue, which is on the right of the page. So we have a setback of 28 feet where 50 feet is required. Based on the limited operation of this parking area, it's my opinion that this driveway will certainly serve this parking area in a safe and efficient manner. It won't create any impacts to queuing or any kind of conflicting maneuvers on the adjacent right-of-way lines. So in my opinion, the 28 feet is more than adequate for this particular project. That really wraps up all the design waivers and variances.
Thank you, Tom, for that very comprehensive list. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for this witness at this time.
Okay, any questions from the board?
This is a question/statement. The first, the use variance, proposed for principal use, you know, the veterinarian clinic. Isn't it a lot more than a clinic? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about grooming, boarding, and daycare.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's a big difference from going from a clinic to that.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not the planner. The planner will certainly touch on that in great detail.
That's really, it's more than comment.
Board professionals?
Question. We didn't go through the engineering letter. Any issue complying with any of the outstanding comments in that letter?
No, I did have a chance to go through this letter. It's a very well-prepared letter. I don't have any issues with the outstanding items, and then I touched on all of them throughout my testimony here, and I have no issue with addressing them as conditions of approval.
Okay.
Those are the not satisfied comments, right?
Correct, yeah.
I just have one question, this is for Mike. Do you agree that the contrast of the ambient lights is no longer a waiver?
Correct, that's related to the direct illumination from a internally illuminated or digital sign.
Okay, and the same thing for the illumination of the white blue light?
Correct.
That's also, okay.
Does the board have a preference for a bike rack detail that I should be on the lookout for?
Bike rack detail, what, people stealing bikes? You know.
Just in terms of the style of the bike rack, I mean, there's an Asbury Park kind of standard that we always look for, and we can ask that be the one they use.
We're okay with that, right?
Well, this was one that they mentioned that you need one that, usually the ones that we have on the streets and whatnot are for like 1 or 2 bikes. This is for 16 bikes, so.
We do have a detail that we could provide that was used to design the 16 feet and the size, or the 16 bikes and the size that we show on the plan.
Is that already?
It's not in the plans, but we can certainly provide that.
And we would have no problem working with your professional staff.
Yeah, that would have probably be with the transportation manager, would probably be the one to figure out what is appropriate.
Sure.
So the bike rack is going to be for employees and people bringing their dogs.
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so that's going to vary from time to time based on how many employees ride their bikes.
Yes.
And we said it was for 16?
Yeah, 16 is more than enough for this type of use.
But weren't there supposed to be 2? 1 in the back for the employees and 1 in the front or am I missing something?
No, there's 1 rack. I did provide testimony that mentioned there is provisions to provide bike storage inside the building
that's
for
right,
the employees.
inside the building, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's right, for the employees.
But there is
it's
only
inside
1
the
rack.
building And outside for people
Yeah.
bringing
The
their dogs.
rack's double-sided too.
Okay.
Just so you know, so you could load it on both sides.
Okay, we hope that people will be encouraged to chain their bikes, so at least that's my concern.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Mr. Hurst, can you move the mic closer to?
I'm sorry. Okay. I know, I said I would hope that there would be some sign there, letting people know that the bike brackets for usage of the veterinary hospital.
We would have no problem with that. I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because you do have young people driving their bikes to school. You know, or you know, I have a bike.
Sure.
You know, so, you know, look out for that. You know, okay. Do we have any questions from the public? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address. We all know who you are, Mr. Alfredo.
John Alfredo, 6th Avenue. Excuse the glasses, I had to put drops in my eyes. Are we going to address the sewage capacity of this place? You're going from what used to have, even when the barber shop was there, I think there were 2 people that worked there. I haven't heard anything about the capacity, how old the line is. Will it be able to handle it? You're going to 20 employees here from none. And that line hasn't been used in a long time. I just have, nowhere have I heard testimony about it. I was just wondering if we were going to hear about it.
All right. Do you have any plans to address that, sir?
Yes, we did receive a comment in the Insight Review Letter dated May 19th, 2022, requesting information on the sewer line. We will have no problem going out to inspect the sewer line to confirm its capacity, condition, location, depth, size, etc. If there's any reason that the sewer line would not be sufficient for the proposed use, the applicant would be required to upgrade it to be sufficient for the proposed use.
Satisfied, sir? Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from the general public? Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Tom. I'd like to call Andy Jaffola. Mr. Beekman, this witness was not previously sworn.
Swear affirm the testimony that you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And if you could just state your name and again spell your last name for the record.
Andrew Jaffola, last name J-A-F as in Frank, O-L-O-A.
All right, Mr. Jaffola, if you could just state the licenses and certifications and qualifications that you have, please.
Sure. I am a registered professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I'm also a professional traffic operations engineer. That's a national certification put out by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which requires PDHs and upgrades every 3 years, or renewal every 3 years. I'm a principal at Dynamic Traffic. We are a transportation consulting firm, and we participate as the traffic engineer on private developments throughout the state, and we also do work for boards and municipalities as well, representing their matters.
And your licenses and certifications are current and up to date?
Yes.
And you've testified before other land use boards?
Yes, sir.
And you've been accepted as a qualified professional?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully ask that the board accept the credentials. Okay. And then just to begin with, you're obviously familiar with this application, correct?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the site?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the plans?
Yes.
And I know you were good enough to be here tonight and at the last meeting, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and I know you've had an opportunity to analyze the property from the proposal from a traffic standpoint. Can you please tell the board what you did, how you did, and what your conclusions are?
Sure, and actually, I think I'd like to start maybe from the parking perspective. I know there's some concerns of the board, just kind of hearing, listening to the testimony. Really have two items I'd like to address here. We have parking, and then we have the trip generation of the traffic associated with the site. And I think going through the parking first, typically I would like to go through traffic, but in this case, I think going through the parking first helps to inform the traffic because of the specific operations of this site as it relates to the parking. So initially with our original application, we submitted a letter dated August 16th, 2021, and listening to some of the board's concerns with regard to parking and especially some of the questions with regard to the operations by the applicant, we also issued a second letter dated May 10th of this year, both of which have been submitted to the board. So I'm going to direct your attention to the letter May 10th of 2022. And in that letter, we go through and outline the operational testimony as it relates to the anticipated parking demand for this site. And I think a lot of the questions of the applicant were really geared towards how many employees are going to be, how many customers are you going to have coming to the site for each of the various uses on the site. So within that letter, we really break it down by the parking associated with the staff, the employees, I think it was referred to earlier in testimony this evening, and I would agree that there's going to be a maximum of 20 employees for the site when they're fully operational. Now, just to summarize, that's 4 doctors, that's 9 nurses, 4 receptionists, 1 groomer, and 2 staff associated with the boarding and daycare operation of the site. Now, one thing that wasn't completely discussed was, when does that actually happen? You know, that's not 20 employees, that's starting at the drop-off for the boarding and daycare, starting around 7 a.m., going to the end of the night. That's really your peak operation. And your peak operation for your site, which was testified, is really starting around noon. That's when the 2 additional receptionists come in, and then that stops around 5 p.m. So when we talk about the employees on site and the 20 employees, we're really talking about on a weekday from around noon to 5. And then outside of those hours in the morning, you're talking about less employees on site. Now for the customer parking, you know, there's really, they're related, but from a parking perspective, we really broke these down into 3 different uses on the site. You have the clinic customers. That's what you would associate with the existing operation that you see about 500 feet south from this proposed site. Those are your well visits, those are your operations, your sick visits for pets, like any other kind of veterinary office. And those are your clinic customers. Now, I'll go through each one of these in more detail in a moment. We have daycare and boarding customers. So I really relate, I consider these more or less the same, because they're really sharing the same space within the facility. And what I mean by that is, if he has, there's 2 customers that are boarding over a length of period, a certain period of time, that means he can take in 2 less animals for daycare. So when we talk about the 20 animals that can be accommodated on site, that really accounts for boarding and daycare occurring at the same, utilizing that same space. So we look at those customers. And the last grouping of customers are the grooming customers. You know, those are customers that are dropping their dog off for grooming services and then picking them up later. So how are these related? I think we can all, you know, if we've had animals, we can all imagine these uses as separate uses, but I really want to talk about how these are related here from an operational perspective. One thing that jumped out at me when listening to the operational testimony is that customers of the daycare and boarding and the grooming would have to be existing patients for the facility. That's important because these uses are going to be complementary to the services that are provided on site through the vet office. So when we talk about the clinic customers, I'll get into this in a moment, but customers have the ability to drop off their dog in the morning, and they can have the vet service, they could be part of the daycare for the rest of the day, and maybe their dog gets groomed. So while it's not always going to be that way, that is the vision that I heard and I understand, and the fact that he's not accepting customers off the street that aren't existing vet customers, that really breathes life into that operation. So I think with that, you're going to see one customer who's coming in and might be using 2 or 3 of these services on any given visit. But with that being said, when we looked at this, we did look at this operation as though these are 3 distinct uses on the site, given the information that was provided to us. So if we go through each one of these uses individually, clinic customers. What you heard from the applicant is that he's looking to increase the number of doctors on the site from, I believe it was 2 to 3, what it is today, to 4 on the site. One of those doctors would be available for operations, or they would be designated for handling operations throughout the day. And 3 of those doctors would be associated with handling well visits, sick visits, just kind of normal appointments associated with dogs. For the well and sick visits, they're scheduled on the hour and on the half hour. So they're scheduled at 9 a.m., 9:30, 10 a.m., 10:30, and throughout the day. And the operations, when we talk about surgeries of animals or scheduled types of operations, those are things that are scheduled throughout the day, but they're anticipated with the schedule they might have already with the well visits that might be scheduled, for instance. But importantly, they're encouraged to have their animals dropped off at the beginning of the day, so they can manage the drop off of that animal coming in. And when that animal gets picked up after the surgery, there's a phone call that happens from the veterinary office to say, your dog is available to come pick up. There's usually a discussion that might take place between the doctor and the owner. So that's a scheduled period of time, and they have the ability to look at the existing schedule to know, they're not going to schedule, they're not going to overburden their facility. They have the ability to schedule that pickup time where maybe they have more availability on site. So when we talk about the clinic customers, the well visits and sick visits, it's 3 doctors. If each doctor can take in 1 customer every half hour, on the top of the hour, you're looking at 3 potential customers coming in, and at the half hour, you're looking at another 3 customers coming in. So in a worst case scenario, you would have 3 customers on site at the end of their appointment. Say they were to park at 9 a.m., the end of the appointment is coming at 9:30, and then next 3 customers come in at 9:30, getting ready for their appointment. The worst case scenario, you're looking at 6 customers parked on site, really overlapping. That being said, and just from my personal experience, I'm a dog owner. I know what it's like to deal with, drop off and dealing with dogs, and also, I'm only one person discussing it with the applicant. Most appointments are substantially less than a half hour. Most appointments take place where you come in, you do your appointment, and you leave, and that is 15, 20 minutes, somewhere in that range. So worst case, you're looking at 6 people on site associated with the clinic visits. I think in practice, it's going to be substantially less than that. But again, for the purposes of this exercise, we did consider 6 parking spaces being needed for the clinic customers.
What about emergency customers? Is that in your calculation?
Well, emergency, I think the testimony was provided that in an emergent situation, I believe that they wouldn't accept them, or they would refer them to an animal hospital. In those types of situations, I believe the testimony was that he wasn't set up to accept those emergent situations. Certainly, if there's an emergency and you make a phone call and he can take in that animal, if he only has 3 doctors and they're associated with other existing appointments, he would need to fit that in. And I believe the other testimony that was provided is that they do allow for time throughout the day to anticipate. That would really be a sick visit for this type of site, and be able to take in that animal.
If I may jump in, just to piggyback off that, yes, we save appointment slots exclusively for that because we have seen so many emergencies. So we don't book those appointments. So our emergencies are actually, we call them same-day sick appointments. But yes, we encourage that they be dropped off so that they're not taking a parking space. If they are an existing client, they usually have to be in order to drop off anyway. But yeah, we have them already, emergencies set in our schedule for that use.
Okay, thank you. Question. Now, you're giving everybody a half hour, correct? Basically?
Yeah.
Okay, what if you have to put a dog down? That's gonna take longer than a half hour.
I would defer to the applicant, but I would imagine they would schedule that time to be sensitive to that type of need.
We do. We try to book them at the end of the day, or at a time where there's not going to be somebody breathing. We try to give them as much time as they need to say goodbye to their pets. We used to do house calls. I'd like to get back to those if we can, because that would eliminate the need for parking. But it's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, we book them at the end of the day. We stay as late as need be for those types of appointments, or right before a large break, so a lunch break or whatever. We get them in. They don't even really need an appointment. We'll get them in about it.
Get them
It's a
in.
unique situation though.
Yeah, okay, but you would also have to hold on to the dog for the pet for cremation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the people would also have to return to pick up the ashes. eventually.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, it's just a longer period of time than a half hour, that's what I'm saying.
I want to make sure I understand your question, but not all that is not done in the same day.
I understand, I know that.
Whereas I think we also have designated appointments, and I'm not sure if Andy got to this yet, where it's going to be pickup, drop-off location anyway, so that would be the designated zone for those types of things too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sir, again, do you anticipate any periods where there would be double parking, especially on Memorial Drive?
No, and I'll get to that. We took extensive parking counts on Memorial Drive, 6th Avenue. I work in Belmar, that's where our office is, so I made a point to come to Asbury Park and have lunch and kind of drive by it in the middle of the day, see what's going on. I'll get there, but there was really, Memorial Drive is not being used for parking. I understand it's restricted on the railroad side, but even on the west side, there's nobody parking on Memorial Drive between 6 and Sunset.
Friday night when there's a football game?
Well, I understand there's a football game, but the testimony provided was that the office closes at 5 o'clock on Friday nights when there's a football game.
Okay, athletic events start at 4.
Yeah.
Okay.
When did you go do your site visit? And how many times did you go? And what time of day?
Sure.
Because that's what I want to hear. I understand these numbers, but already we're at 26 people in the height of the day between 12 and 5, and there's only 10 parking spots.
Sure. So, all right. And then I think I know where you're going, and I'll just jump to the chase then.
Yes.
So we took parking counts on site. We did it during summer, July 14th, from 9 to 11 a.m., 3 to 5 p.m. We also did it on November 1st because we wanted to get summer. We also wanted to get school.
Wait, so this is 2021?
2022, November 1st. I'm sorry, 2021, excuse me.
Yeah. And July what? What day?
14th of 21, and also July 17th of 21, which was a
What
Saturday.
days of the week is that?
The 14th I don't have on me. The 17th was a Saturday, so the 14th would have been a Wednesday. November 1st, I don't have that immediately in front of me, but I could get
I'm
that for
looking
you.
at calendar and I'm not So 2 days?
Yes, but like I said, I was going out there looking at spot counts, just personally visiting the site throughout the day. So those were the days when we took counts we had someone continuously on site, taking counts in 15-minute intervals. But beyond that, I was also observing the parking conditions. And what I found was that what we counted was represented. Every time I would go out there was in fact more parking stalls available than the incremental counts, or about the same. There was actually one morning when I went out around 9:45 a.m. Where I believe it was 28 parking stalls were available. What we found in the worst case in our counts was 25 parking spaces being available. So, like I said, in general, very consistent findings. I understand that when there's sporting events, there's going to be a challenge. I imagine it's not just a challenge for this area; it's for the greater neighborhood. We don't have counts at a sporting event. If that's going to be a question, I don't have those counts. But I can imagine that Memorial Drive is likely used. I would imagine that the parking on 6th Avenue is used. I'm not going to dispute that a sporting event is going to use some of those parking stalls. But I would, we have the 10 stalls on site. We also understand that the peak operation for this vet office is really concentrated from noon, ending towards 5 p.m., and they close their office doors at 5 p.m. on a Friday. I was out there today. In fact, there was a Little League baseball game out there.
Because they're offering 24/7 services.
No, they're not.
They're boarding, so someone's going to be there.
Right, and there would be one employee on site during the off hours. There would be no need to.
So there's not going to be any pickups after 5 p.m.
That was the testimony provided. That's the way he would schedule it.
Only, I would suspect only under special circumstances. Definitely not something where we would need 10 spaces on our site for emergencies, a problem with an animal that's already boarding.
You can't really testify that it's not at the office closes though, because this is going to be open all the time.
Our phones shut off, the doors are locked. There's 2 to 3 people I'd say probably 2 people on staff that would be staying overnight.
I'd like to maybe address that question differently, because you're concerned. What I'm hearing is and let's just assume that pickups do happen after 5 p.m. on a Friday, because I think that's the core of your concern. If the veterinary,
it's just that it's not going to be 12 to 5 only, and I don't think you going out 2 different days when we've lived here 20 plus years and know that block, like there's significant traffic over there, and this is my problem with traffic counts, and this happened in a previous application that someone went out there twice and said, no, there's not going to be any traffic. We had another hearing a year later, and all the neighbors were there complaining about traffic. So I understand how 2 traffic counts, you're telling me that this site that only provides 10 off-street parking is not going to cause a problem. You're literally right next to a school.
If you don't mind, I would like to finish my testimony. I do acknowledge I walk into boards throughout the state, and I don't live in every town in the state. I don't have that ability. I live in one town in the state. I follow my professional engineering judgment to provide my best professional opinion in front of this board. I don't dispute your personal experience, and I would certainly encourage you to share that. But I would like to get through my testimony, just give you the benefit of that.
But please tell me how this site can accommodate.
So so what I would like to do is get there, because I'm not claiming that 10 parking spaces is going to accommodate all of the staff and the customers associated with this site. The reasoning that we took parking counts here was to demonstrate, and I acknowledge, I understand what you're saying. You live here, and there's sporting events, there's days when some of those stalls are used. But when we were out there, that parking was not being used. When we look at this surrounding area, there is not an area that would be developed in the future that would create future parking demand. There's the site, I believe it's just to the
Fifth and Memorial.
yes, to the south of the existing vet office, where the local 130 is. That area is being developed, but that is, in my opinion, that's 2 blocks removed from this facility. When we look in this immediate area, there's reason to believe that the parking counts that we would take would be representative not only of today, but what it would foreseeably be in the future. Because again, there's not vacant parcels that you might have a retail coming in or an office building coming in, or some other kind of use that's going to create an increased parking demand out there. So notwithstanding the comment on the sporting events, we don't have counts there, so I can't address that directly. We have 20 employees that we are anticipating on this site as an absolute worst case condition. That does not account for employees that might bike to the site, that might take Ubers, or take other alternative means of really biking or Ubers to the site. That assumes that every single employee needs a parking space in the surrounding street network. Now, one thing I do want to draw attention to is that the existing office is located 500 feet to the south. The testimony provided was that there's 12 employees that are already parking in the greater street network, and those employees would come here. So although there's 20 employees associated with this, we're really talking about 8 new employees associated with this practice. So I would anticipate that parking arrangement that's happening with the existing, they're going to tend to migrate to this area and want to park in this area rather than wherever they are, and there's going to need to accommodate an additional 8 stalls.
They'll have to accommodate all 20, not just 8.
Right, exactly.
Because they're migrating, so you have to accommodate them all.
Exactly. So what the parking counts show is that the worst case situation, there's 25 available parking stalls on Memorial Drive between 6th and Sunset, on 6th between Memorial and the high school on the opposite side of the angled parking stalls, and on 6th between Main and Memorial. When we took those counts, we identified a minimum of 25 being available at the worst case. One thing that we did note that was interesting is that the peak demand associated with that on-street parking was occurring in the morning, and there was a drop-off that would happen around noontime, and more parking became available after noon, which coincidentally, if you're listening to the applicant, his peak period really starts to pick up around noon. That's when he brings in 2 additional receptionists to the site. So it's a relationship that I think works well here. You have a use that in the residential area that's going to generate parking during the day, the opposite of when residential uses might need on-street parking. You have observed parking conditions that's showing a greater demand in the morning. Again, we have a use that's looking to have a larger, its peak operation is in the afternoon, not in that morning period. And we have 10 parking spaces on site that are being proposed to accommodate the customers of the site as well as the pickup and drop-off operations for the site.
And the employees.
So at this time, the goal is for the applicant to use the site parking for employees. I anticipate that he's not going to need all that parking. I think we're recommending that he dedicates 2 of those parking stalls for 15-minute pickup drop-off to encourage pickup and drop-off of animals to the site. That would leave 8 remaining parking stalls. I think that he's going to need 3 to 4 of those additional ones throughout the day, and the remainder could be used by employees, certainly.
I'd like to ask the owner, what's the parking situation right now, presently where you're located? How many of your employees do you know drive, and how many of your employees bike?
So currently, our landlord allows us to have, we've occupied 2 units, so we technically only get 2 spaces per unit for the front of the building and for the back of the unit. So we've taken the initiative to just do 100% street parking. Anyone of my employees parks in the street, including myself. Of our employees that bike, I think daily, 4, I want to say, bike to work every day. 2 from Belmar, 2 from Asbury Park, I think it is. This summer it's going to change because we have a vet student that is going to be adding to that too.
How many drive?
I don't know, the remainder of that, so it's 6, 5, 8.
8?
Is that what it is? Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, you had 12, so.
Yes.
So you have 8 people that drive right now.
Yeah, we don't have, and our landlord has never approached us to say that the parking, I think because we're the only one occupying 2 units, I try to be respectful to our neighbors, and we park in the street, and it hasn't been a problem, honestly, especially with, Fifth Avenue is pretty wide open, and I anticipate.
I'm just looking at this expansion to 20 employees.
Sure.
So if you have 4 on bikes, 8 driving, okay, and now you're going to expand 8 more employees, your parking in that parking lot isn't enough to handle the expansion of your employees, let alone the people who are going to be bringing their pets there.
No, but our current situation is worse than this, and we don't have a problem like keeping the staff happy with where they're parking now.
Okay, but I can foresee when people are dropping pets off, double parking taking place out in front of the, especially on the Memorial Drive side. To your expert, did you take that into consideration, the increased staff along with peak drop-off time?
So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to designate 2 of the stalls within the parking area as 15-minute stalls for that pickup drop-off. One thing to remember about the drop-off, particularly in the morning, is that's happening from 7 to 9 a.m. For the most part, certainly there can be drop-offs that happen outside of that period, but it's encouraged that they happen before 9 a.m. The office opens for appointments starting at 9 a.m., and that's really when the demand associated with the clinic customers and the majority of the staff starts to occur. So there's going to be plenty of parking within the parking lot, the 10 parking spaces during the peak drop-off for them to drop off their animals. For the pickup, again, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to encourage having the 15-minute stalls within that parking area. So there's a place for them to go rather than double parking the Memorial or doing something they shouldn't be doing. With that being said, there was some discussion with the applicant about utilizing some of the curb frontage along Memorial for pickup drop-off, because sometimes that can be more convenient for customers. We really wanted to have the 15-minute parking spaces on site, and we can accommodate the rest of the customers on site. So we had a discussion that the applicant would direct its staff to not park directly within the frontage of this building, so that in the scenario that someone does want to use the curb frontage, it's there and they would not be double parking, because it would be more convenient for them to be within the curb frontage. But again, we are accommodating that pickup drop-off on site with the 2 15-minute stalls that we're looking to designate.
2 15-minute stalls on site?
Yes.
Okay. Would it be advantageous to work with the police department to dedicate a couple of parking spaces for short-term parking during the hours of, opening and closing, or, peak hours?
We could, and I don't think the applicant would not do it, but just based on what I observed out there, I didn't see a demand for that curb frontage. So going through the process of establishing that sign and establishing those rules, it might be something that isn't really needed because there's not a demonstrated demand for that curb frontage. Relate that to Cookman Avenue or some of the other busier parts of town, that curb frontage isn't a demand. There's a lot of demand for that curb frontage. You need to have that sign out there to really carve out that space for that pickup drop off. So I don't think the applicant would object to going that if that's the desire of the board, and I think it would be great to have those signs. I certainly don't object to it, but just in this scenario, this specific location, I don't necessarily see a need for it.
Oh, I just believe failure to prepare to fail. So I think that might be advantageous to do.
Sure.
Thank you.
And can I ask about when you came up with these numbers of how many stalls are available on these streets?
Yep.
So you started out with, like, in some cases 13, in some cases 32 stalls. So how did you come up with that number?
No, typically, yeah, so, because these aren't unmarked out here, typically, if you mark them, you usually mark them to be 20 to 22 feet long, depending on their position. In this case, they're unmarked, so we refer to the residential site improvement standards, which typically says that you would account for 23 feet of curb frontage as a space, because typically you don't mark spaces in residential environments, so.
All right, so for example, on Memorial Drive, so it would be 13 times 22. That is your frontage. Am I understanding that
No,
properly?
Memorial Drive is not the full frontage. Memorial Drive is Memorial Drive between 6th Avenue and Sunset.
Right, the whole thing.
Yes, the whole thing,
So,
yes.
so you're saying that that's 13 times 22, whatever that number is. That's how you came up with
23,
that.
yes.
And did you take into account that there's 23 feet or 25 feet that you have to come in before you go to the end of the block?
Yes.
So you've got two more spaces that are gone.
Right, and there's also a driveway along that frontage as well.
Driveways, and when you look at where your new driveway is going to be, you can't have a space there. To the
Right.
to the north side of the driveway, you cannot have a space. There's not enough room. So is that still 13?
That space, I would anticipate you're gonna drop 2 spaces there, so you're 11. When I looked at it, so 23 it's a large number.
Right, but whatever the number is, let's say
Yeah,
it's 22, let's say it's 22. So I'm just trying to get that, is 13 really 13?
Right,
That's
so.
what I'm trying to get at.
No, this was taken at the time of the count with the driveway being installed there. You would drop it about 2 stalls there, and then similarly along 6th Avenue, there would be a reduction of about 2 stalls there
Okay,
as well.
so then it's 11 in both of those cases. And what about on 6th Avenue, the angle, does that
6th Avenue,
still
the angle,
32?
that would not change, nor would the 6th Avenue east of the tracks, because that took into account all existing conditions.
Okay.
And then did you get traffic counts for Sunset?
No, we did not take parking counts along Sunset, no.
All right, so we're also considering that the dates that these were, I mean, this is a high school. So you've got kids that are parking in your area C.
Yes.
They're parking
Yeah.
there, which are dates that you did not take unless November 1st, the kids were in school.
They were. We purposely took the November 1st count because we acknowledged that we took summer counts initially. So the whole reason we did the November count was to obtain a school count.
That's my next question.
So you did take a school count. The only thing that wasn't taken into account was that if there was an event, a football game, a t-ball game, any of the other many games that happen in that area. That's the only thing that wasn't taken.
So I'll just respond to the football game. We don't have that directly accounted for, but just understanding that they occur on Friday evenings. And the veterinary office, I'm not going to use the word close, but they cease taking appointments at 5 p.m.
Right, but can we not focus on a football game?
So
We're talking about t-ball practice.
Sure, so actually I was out there.
We're talking about all the practices of all the different teams that play there.
So I was there today, right before I showed up this evening.
Yes.
There was a game occurring.
Yes.
Before the last hearing, I came, I sat in the audience. There was a game that evening as well. The parking availability was actually more during that period of time than at these counts. because the school wasn't in session. So that, the 32 angled parking stalls, although there was a turnover from the school parking to the T-ball and the other events, there ended up being more parking available. Just, I didn't take counts, but I just observed in general there was more available during that period of time.
Then the other thing that have you taken into account a little bit of an odd way of the traffic flow that's in that area? Meaning that you're coming down west on Memorial, on 6th, coming down, you get to the end, I mean, it's people would have to cross over to get into that park, into parking. So you have to make the left onto Memorial to get into that slot. Then you come back around. And that, it's just odd the way that this high school has it, that you're going straight down, and if you go too far, you've got to make a U-turn, because you can't get through.
Right, it's
So
dead end, right? You
the flow,
can't get through
there's
the
a dead end there
right.
also. So it's just the increased traffic of that area is going to be just the flow. There's going to be a lot of increased traffic, both on Memorial and 6th. Those are the two areas that I'm very concerned about. Traffic in general, never mind,
Sure,
parking
yeah.
as well, but traffic in general there's going to be a lot more movement there, along with more dogs that will be walked just because they have to be, by their owners, not necessarily by the vet. So there'll be a lot more movement, and I think people will be sitting there a little longer than the 15 minutes that you might be mentioning, because they want to have their dogs prepared to go in, is my guess. But those are the kind of things that are my concern about the flow of the traffic and the amount of traffic stalls. Looking towards the future, because we're increasing, our city is growing, and I'm concerned about that.
So I'll respond to that. I mean, we've kind of been talking about parking. As far as the circulation goes, we have the one-way circulation aisle on the site. So for customers in general who we anticipate to utilize the parking lot, that's really the use. That's the way it's designed to be done, and the lot can accommodate the customers. They would be able to make a left or a right into the parking lot off of Memorial, and they would be able to come out on the 6th, make a right, and then proceed to the greater road network. So I don't think customers are going to have to interact with that area that you're speaking of, which is just to the west of the driveway along 6th Avenue.
Only if they make a mistake.
What's that?
Only if they make a mistake.
Only if they make a mistake, but this isn't a use where a 7-Eleven where people are going to know it. They might make the mistake once when they open, but beyond that, they're going to know this network.
What if they're looking for parking?
Well, and that's the 10 stalls doesn't accommodate customers. The 10 stalls is more than enough to accommodate customers. The most, you're going to have a pickup drop-off that's peaking before 9 a.m. when the veterinary office opens for business. When the veterinary office opens for business, like I mentioned, 6 customers, worst case, being on site concurrently, and then you would have 2 additional stalls for pickup drop-off. Now that might be for surgeries. Maybe there was a late drop-off for the boarding or daycare. Maybe there's a pickup in the middle of the day. That's 8 stalls, worst case scenario, and we have 10 proposed here.
Yeah, but it's handicap, so even though it's great to have, you can't really count on that always being occupied.
It's a parking stall that's on site, but even if we discount that, 8 stalls, there would be 9 if you were to discount that. So, and that, again, this is worst case scenario. This doesn't account for people coming on their bike. This assumes that all three customers are on site while the next 3 customers are coming in behind them, and they're overlapping each other for every appointment. That, again, this is a worst case scenario, and we can accommodate that on site.
And then is that including the grooming customers too?
And I would group that within the 15-minute stalls. That's really why we have those 15-minute stalls. That's to accommodate the grooming, the daycare, those types of quick drop-offs.
Let's be realistic. Nobody's bringing their dog to the vet on their bike. I mean, I can see employees, but I don't see somebody bringing their cat or their dog to the vet on their bike.
Yeah,
Very rare.
I'll admit I wouldn't think of doing it. I am going through the applicants firsthand knowledge that he said he did it. But again, we're not accounting for that. So,
Yeah, and I have to say that, I mean, I get the concept that, that this parking lot is for the customers, but let's be real. We're in Asbury Park, nobody listens to pretty much anything. So they'll park wherever the heck they want to park, whatever is the easiest, and probably Memorial is going to be the easiest.
and if it's available, why not? I have no objection, because if it's available, that means employees are there and staff are there, and that means everything that I'm saying is true. But you know what? And the fact that it's not available, you have the 10 stalls right there, and they don't need to park across town to get to this facility.
And one thing that concerns me here is that we don't have anyone from the public that lives there that can give us some insight to say, what the heck? Or, yay. That we don't have anyone that can tell us that.
What do you want to know?
No, I'm saying the people that live on, around that building. Like, are they, all right, so then when we get to your
Public comment
or question, once we're done.
I have a question
Yeah,
for you. So these numbers are based on doors opening right now. But obviously, the applicant has a very successful business. What happens in 10 years when this site's booming even more, there's maybe 30 or 40 staff members there?
All I can do is plan on the metrics that have been provided. I know he's building out this building, and these are the staffing projections that he's provided for a booming business. What he's told to me is that he doesn't anticipate having this staff right off the bat. This is what he sees himself growing into. Beyond that, I can't really answer that question.
I have thought about it though.
Is this like 1 to 5 year plan?
What is what? Where
The numbers
we're going?
provided.
Yes, 5 years. Yeah, that's where we're going for this type of scenario. We're still staying, we still have a business 1 block away that we have a long-term lease with too. It's just, we wanted to have something that we move into as we grow. And so this is the proposed location for that. So we can get it on the market before some New York realtor comes in.
Okay.
But yes, I recognize that if we want to grow, we need to come up with an even longer term solution to this. And we've had those discussions. It's just those discussions have not advanced enough for me to feel comfortable to discuss them with you, because they're still just discussions.
Okay. What concerns me is say we approve this, okay? When would be the projection for you completing construction and opening the doors?
Yeah, so we hope that within 2023, midway, that we can open our doors.
2023.
If it's limited, again, that's kind of the safety net of having the lease where we're at a block away. We've thought about an incremental opening as well. Do we just open the daycare side of things first and then kind of stage it? Do we just open the vet side of things, or maybe just put 2 exam rooms in there while we still have the clinic where we have now, and just kind of work it out? Do we put all the offices and just move people in over here while we still have the building where we're at now, so we can kind of even out, test things out to see what works best? We don't want people to have to walk a half a mile to get stressed out cats and having to deal with them.
So you're talking about a gradual growth.
I think we could play around with that, but this is the ideal situation, when we're fully operational, that this is what we've studied to work,
Okay. I mean, I'm not looking at bust the boom, but I'm looking at gradual growth and adjustment to the neighborhood itself. My prime concern are the people who live there.
Mm-hmm.
I accept businesses to employ people and to serve the community. But I also look at who was there first. And I expect those people to be comfortable with your business being there.
It's not so much he was there first, but just to piggyback, but what's allowed in that zone.
Yeah, what's allowed in that zone also.
I'm still struggling with that.
Yeah, and I want the resident, as well as we would love you to be successful. Our prime concern, also, my prime concern are the taxpayers, okay, who live there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the children in the neighborhood.
Right, and I understand that. And, we did think about how close we are to the high school and how great it would be to have after-school programs for students to intern, to come learn how to take care of animals and maybe be a veterinarian one day. It's a good profession, and I think it would be helpful to open up those programs to the community. Our neighbors are a big chunk of our clientele. If they would be here to tell us this is a bad idea if the things were not working out, and I would not be here if things were not working out, trying to move into another building, so.
Are we done with your testimony, sir?
I wanted to talk about trip generation. I think that was a concern that I heard, was not just about parking, but just general traffic on Memorial Drive and 6th Avenue. So I would like to get into that. So just to put things into reference as to, this is not a state highway, but if it were a state highway, when does DOT start to consider significant impacts of a project? They look at 100 trips as that threshold where you start to really look at, various types of impacts. And I wanted to say that, not to say that you should adhere to that standard, but just to put some sort of context into it. ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, they also recommend that 100 trip threshold where you look at, impacts that could be significant due to a development. So again, this isn't to say that this is your standard. This is just a standard that exists out there to put some sort of number to it.
So to clarify, you're saying if it's under 100, DOT doesn't?
You wouldn't be doing capacity analysis. You would not be taking traffic counts. So from a trip generation perspective, again, if you relate this back to the operational testimony, your highest hour is going to be from 8 to 9 a.m. And if you really just kind of, think through the various components, you have your employees that are coming in that are available for that 9 a.m. opening. So they're coming in the half hour immediately prior to 9 a.m. But you also have the drop off that's happening with the daycare that's typically happening before work hours. So that's starting from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So if you assume that you have 10 drop-offs happening in each of those 2 hours, from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., you'd have 10 drop-offs, 10 people coming in to drop off their vehicle or drop off their pet, and then 10 leaving. And then you would have staff coming in, which from 8 to 9 a.m., again, it's not that full load, but assuming it is, that would be 20 staff coming in, but they would just be coming in and staying there. So you're looking at around 40 trips, which is 40% of that threshold that I just mentioned. When you think about that in terms of minutes, because I always think it's helpful to think about the number of trips in terms of how many per minute, because you can kind of really visualize that. You'd have about 30 coming in, which is about 1 every 2 minutes during that highest hour, which from a traffic perspective, that is not a significant amount of trips. In my observations out there, I understand Memorial Drive is busy as you head further to the south, but specifically this portion of Memorial Drive at Memorial and 6th, I did not observe a very significant amount of traffic. Not to say it doesn't happen at times, but my observation is that this was not a particularly busy end of town. I think this is a site that is ideally located because you can come to 6th Avenue, you come right to Main Street, and you can head north to exit the community, or you can stay on Main Street and go south through Asbury Park to filter your way through your neighborhood if you live in town and you have a pet. But it's very close to that, the main corridor in and out of town. This is not, although it is in a residential district, it is really on the very edge of that district, and it's really, in my opinion, in a good location to accommodate this nominal level of traffic. So, and particularly, it's not to be underestimated that the people that are coming here are going to be return customers. They're going to know the area. These aren't people that are flying in and flying out. They're regulars, so to speak. So they might get up in that area once where you have that reverse direction on 6th Avenue, the one-way portion, but that's something that they're going to learn, and it's not something that I anticipate that's going to happen with regularity. So from a traffic intensity perspective, in my experience and personally being out here, both as just a person who's been to Local 130 on Saturdays and just someone who then was part of this project and decided to spend some time up here, I have not seen traffic conditions that would concern me with this level of traffic activity that would come to this site.
So how many trips average do you project?
So,
Sorry, I didn't get
yeah, so again, using the operations, 38 in the morning, the worst case in the morning. In the afternoon, so in the off hours, it would be 18. In the afternoon, it would be something in between those two. Again,
between 18 and 38.
yeah, because you can really, in the drop off, you can really project that a little bit more because people tend to drop off their animals before they go to work, right? And that you can kind of anticipate that. But the pickup associated with those animals, that tends to be a lot more spread out throughout the afternoon because you have people that are getting off of work at various times, or maybe they have other engagements towards the end of the day. And on all day, on Monday through Thursday, you can pick up till 7. So that really gives a lot more time for that pickup to be spread out. So that's why I say, it's going to be less than 38 and it's going to be greater than 18 because 18 is kind of your, again, there's 3 customers coming in and going. That would be that activity when you're not having a lot of pickup drop off.
All done?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. I think we've asked no questions, but any more questions from the board? Questions from the professionals?
Maybe you said this and maybe I missed it. When you did your parking counts, what time of day were they done?
Sure, yeah, it was 9 to 11 a.m. and 3 to 5 p.m. That was on the summer weekday. On the summer Saturday, we did 12 to 1 in the height of the afternoon. And then on the school day, again, because we were looking to pick up school counts, we picked up 10 a.m. To 2 p.m.
Is there a reason you limited the parking areas that you studied to the ones that you did? It seems like it was about 300 to 350 feet away. Different on Memorial, it was a little bit shorter. Can you explain kind of your thinking as to why you chose those areas only?
We observed those conditions. We noticed that the curb frontage was generally empty, and we felt comfortable that the parking counts would bear that out. So we didn't feel the need to go further. Just ancillary, just me anecdotally observing conditions, I do know that there is parking available on Sunset Boulevard. It's certainly utilized more on Sunset Boulevard than the streets that we counted, but there is other parking available in the area, but we have to draw the line somewhere, so that's what we did.
Any questions from the public? Mr. Fredo?
John Fredo, 6th Avenue. Are you aware that the DOT is looking to close off the railroad crossing on 6th Avenue?
No, I was not aware of that.
Okay, I think that would affect everything also. Was there any other time, I don't even know how to say this without giving testimony, the traffic pattern from Sunset, going down Sunset, down Memorial, down 6th Avenue to Main Street, did you observe that?
I'm sorry, Sunset crossing over Memorial and to Main Street?
Going down Memorial, going down 6th Avenue. Have you noticed? Did you take it?
Yeah, I've traveled those roads, yes, and I don't find them to be very heavily traveled, again, in this immediate neighborhood. As you travel south of Memorial, every block it becomes a little bit busier because it's picking up the cross streets that are turning on and off Memorial, but in this specific end of Memorial Drive, I did not observe a significant amount of traffic.
All right, but I'm just, when you noticed parking spaces on 6th Avenue between Main and Memorial, Main and Memorial, what time of day did you look there?
He didn't look at Sunset.
He said from Memorial Avenue to Main.
Yeah,
that
that
there
one's
were parking
6.
spaces there.
Memorial, so 6th Avenue between Memorial Avenue and Main.
Yes.
So that's not Sunset.
I'm sorry, that was a traffic pattern. I'm talking about parking spaces. You said you observed parking spaces in that area.
Yes.
What time of day?
Oh, it was the time of day that I just mentioned. It was July 14th from 9 to 11 a.m. And 3 to 5 p.m. It was Saturday, July 17th from 12 to 1. And really where we observed more of the stalls being used was on November 1st, which was a school day, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay, and you notice that there are always cars parked there.
We noticed that there was cars parked there, but we also noticed that there was always available parking spaces there.
Because there are always cars parked from Main Street all the way down 6th when you get to the curb.
Can you please make that in the form of a question?
Oh, I said you noticed that there are always cars parked from Main Street all the way down 6th as you get up to the high school, where the culinary school is. There are always cars parked there. Just an observation.
And I acknowledge that, and we did notice that in the counts as well.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anybody else from the public? Okay, you have another witness?
I do. I have Allison Coffin, our professional planner.
Okay, now. Huh? We could be going past 10 if we continue and we try to close this out tonight. Okay, let's take a 5-minute recess, okay?
Arena break.
We'll take a recess.
5-minute recess, yes, can I get a motion?
Okay, I take a motion that we take a 10-minute recess.
10 minutes?
Yeah?
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 10-minute recess starting now. Bring up the calendar. Well, let's come back to order.
Let's come back to order. Because we need order.
Yeah. All right. Okay, everyone, let's come back to order. I don't have a pen.
Here, Irina. You can see this here.
Okay, roll call. Danielle Harris.
Here.
Brittany Drumlock.
Here.
Tim Slick.
Here.
Bonnie Knott. Here. And Barbara Krizak.
Here.
Thank you, everyone. All right.
Okay, after this discussion, we would like to discuss having, we can't do your testimony tonight, okay, to give you justice, and we just don't want to rip and run through your testimony.
Appreciate that.
Okay, we would rather give you sufficient time based on testimony tonight to prepare, and also so we can absorb what we've already heard. So we would like to come up with a date that is good for everybody.
Very good, thank you.
But as soon as possible. Now,
So Tom, we're gonna carry it. We're not gonna have enough time tonight.
okay. Now, we have talked about carrying it, to the 7th? Or doing it before planning board meeting that Monday night, which will be easier for you.
Which would be on the 6th.
Which will be on the 6th. Now, if we did it on the 6th, we'd have to come in here early to do it.
You'd probably have to come in at 5 to do that.
To give you an hour and a half. Can you get it, and then we can discuss it.
Here anyway.
And
I'm here
either
all
way, it would be a special meeting, so also I just want to remind you that you would have to renotice for that meeting.
Because it's a special meeting.
Yeah.
Now, would we have to, I mean, I know there'd have to be a special notice meeting, but would we have to renotice if we cancel this, carry this to a date certain?
Yes,
Yes.
Just even if we carry it, it's still a special meeting,
Well,
even
I
if it's
think
on
he's
the
asking
date of
if
the planning board.
Carry it to another zoning board meeting?
Oh, you're saying a regular?
Oh, no, if we, I was gonna say, if we even carried it to a special meeting, did I have to renotice? I'll do whatever the town wants, that's not a problem.
Okay, so what date is more conducive for you?
June 6th is the quickest, and I appreciate the ability of the board to make that a special meeting.
We just have to, it's fine for the planning board starts at 7, so we've got to be done by 7, so. So probably 5 to 7 will give you enough of a buffer, I would think, for us to have discussion. I don't know, how long do you think a presentation, not rushed at all, 15 to 20 minutes.
All right, so then giving you 2 hours is,
You
and
got a
our
lot of time to
discussion
go
on
me
top
then.
of that, that probably would give you enough time.
And let me just ask my friend Irina a question, because I know she knows the press deadlines. Do I have time to notice for June 6th?
Oh, that's a good question.
What's today?
If you
The-
get it in tomorrow, I think it'll be published by Friday, and I think you'll be okay, but I think it's gonna be published by Friday.
And it has to be published by Friday. I don't think you'll have time.
No?
No, the press, the Asbury Park Press is the only one that you would have to be able to publish with, and they generally need at least 2 days lead time.
Is the Ledger a newspaper here or no?
No.
Okay,
It's
what's the
only
other?
the Coaster and the Press, and the Coaster only publishes once a week, and you have to have it in by Tuesday.
Okay. Now, let me just add, and I'm sorry for taking the time, and I'm just, and I refer to Irina and Jeff. Definitely, do you think I would have to renotice if we all left here and we carried it to a date certain?
Yeah, so the problem is that the board doesn't generally meet on that evening, and it's a different time.
Right.
So yes.
So I think the board, and I would do this on behalf of the city, I think the board has to notice for a special meeting, which is 48 hours in advance. But I'm just saying, do you think, and I'll do whatever you want, I don't.
I do, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So then, Irina, June 6th then is not realistic for me to get it into the press?
I honestly don't think it is, and I wouldn't want
Okay.
to do that to you. And have-
Well, that was a good try, so.
What day that week would work?
I'm away from the 7th to the 13th. So I guess my answer is none.
None that week, so we would have to.
Not that week.
When is the next zoning board date, Irina?
So the next zoning board date that we can possibly fit you in is the 28th
Of,
of June.
So then we have one on the 14th?
Yes, but we have 2 applications.
What if we came in at 5 o'clock?
It would still be a special meeting.
If it's the 28th, I'm away that.
Oh, that's right, and Mrs. Karsak is. not-
Anything after the 20th, I'm away for 2
Yeah.
weeks.
The 20, and we can't do the planning board meeting on the 27th because you're away.
Right.
So that puts us into July.
July what?
So the next zoning board meeting will be July
What
12th.
about the 14th early? Although then you poor people have to sit here for an extra 2 hours.
Excuse me?
I said if we did the 14th early, your hearing gets to be an extra 2 hours longer.
I'm retired, don't bother me.
All right, Irina, just in terms of what I would suggest is, this is probably the easiest, to carry it to one of these zoning board meetings with the understanding that maybe we can try to schedule a special meeting. And if we carry it to a regular meeting, I won't have to renotice. And then if we do agree upon a special meeting date that is not a regular, I will, that's afterwards, I will notice. But I think there's not a lot of, one of the hardest things in life is for Irina to try to schedule a special meeting in the midst of a public meeting.
Yes. All right, so we're going to carry to July 12th. Is that correct?
July 12th is the date?
That is the soonest date.
All right, and I thought you said July 14th, but.
June 14th.
Oh, okay. So it's July 12th. At 7 o'clock PM. And Mr. Beekman, this would be without any further notice.
That would be correct.
And
And-
June 14th is not an option because your planner's on vacation.
I'm back that day. I'm good that day. I come back the 13th.
Oh, you are good. So
I'm
what
here
about the 14th?
What?
The 14th, we
Of
have
June.
2 applications
Of June.
on that date.
Yeah, could we do a special meeting before?
Oh, I mean, that's up to you.
Because we're just trying to make sure that
That's up to you.
all of us stay together.
Or, because you're gonna have to be here for another 3 hours at least. We have 2 new applications that day.
So you said if we did it on June 14th, we could start early, complete this application, and then pick up the other two applications, correct?
We could do that,
Okay.
yes.
Now, judging from experience, there are always people who cancel. So we might not be here for 3 hours,
Possibly,
okay? So
but highly unlikely because the one applicant has renoticed 4 times, so.
Okay, so we know one person will be here.
They do it right again.
Okay, so why don't we try, would
All
that
right.
work?
Well, why don't we carry it as Mr. Kennedy suggested to a date certain, and then we will try to come up with a special meeting date that works for everyone that we can agree on, because they have to renotice for a special meeting either way.
So right now we're July
And we
12th.
can talk about that offline.
So the meeting date to be carried is going to be to July 12th without notice.
Correct.
Or with the June 14th.
At 7 o'clock.
Okay.
5 o'clock.
No.
It's a regular meeting, that we're going to carry it to a date certain, and then we're going to explore meeting at 5 p.m. on June 14th for a special
I
meeting.
think we would strongly suggest that,
Okay.
in my limited knowledge.
It'll be fair to the
Strongly.
applicant
It'll be
also,
more fair to the applicant and to keep the board together,
which I would like to see.
which we would like to see.
Thank you.
Boards
And
kept together.
so we're going to carry this to July 12th, 2022, without the need for any further public notice. And then if there is a change, if there is special meeting, I will renotice the affected property owners, using the same property owners list that I had for the first one.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
So let's take I'm sorry, we have to take a vote to carry. Can I get a motion? To carry to July 12th, 2022 without further notice.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Dennis Harris and a second by Barbara Kissa. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Application carried to July 12th, 2022, with the stipulation that there will be a special meeting on June 14th, 2022.
All right, make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any opposed? All in favor? All right.